The wind howled across the ancient hills, carrying whispers of a time when the world was alive in ways we can scarcely comprehend today. To the Celts, every tree, stone, and river pulsed with a secret rhythm, a life force that bound everything together. The land wasn't just a backdrop to existence, it was a sacred partner in their story. They didn't simply walk the earth, they danced with it, spoke to it, and believed in the invisible forces that wove through its fabric. Their history was never just about battles or kings. It was threaded with tales that blurred the line between human and divine. Legends were as real as the air they breathed. Each sunrise and storm felt like a message, each shadow a visitor from an unseen world. The Celts lived with an unshakable certainty: magic wasn't hidden in some distant place. It was everywhere, crackling just beneath the surface of reality. The Celts didn't just honor nature, they were inseparable from it. Their gods didn't dwell in the clouds, they were rivers that coursed through the valleys, forests that stood tall in silent reverence, and mountains whose peaks scraped the heavens. The oak groves became cathedrals, their sacred trees holding rituals under canopies thick with leaves. Fire was more than warmth, it was a spirit, alive with power, and water wasn't merely a source of life, but a portal to somewhere else, somewhere brimming with mystery. Imagine standing in those sacred groves at twilight. The air heavy with incense, the murmurs of druids rising like smoke into the sky. Every prayer felt like a thread weaving into the grand tapestry of existence. They spoke not just to gods, but to the otherworld, a place not far from ours, but layered atop it, like mist rolling over a quiet meadow. It was where ancestors lingered, where spirits roamed, and where the answers to unasked questions waited. The Celts didn't fear the otherworld. They carried a quiet reverence, yes, but fear? No. Death wasn't an end, it was a curve in the road. The veil between here and there was thin, so thin that on certain nights, you could almost feel it lift. Samhain was one such time, a night when fires burned against the encroaching dark and the living spoke in hushed tones, hoping to hear whispers back from the departed. It wasn't superstition, it was connection. Their mythology wasn't bound to the dusty pages of history books, it was alive, told in murmured voices by the firelight and carried on the wind through valleys echoing with their songs. Heroes and monsters, gods and mortals, they all bled together in a patchwork of tales where no one was simply one thing or another. A hero could falter, and a villain could love. Nothing was as simple as black and white. Celtic myths didn't follow rules, they flowed like rivers, changing course, spilling over into unexpected places. There was Dullahan, the boy who became a godlike warrior, his rage so fierce it transformed him into a creature of terror. And there was the Morrigan, the goddess who shifted between maiden, crone, and crow, whispering omens of victory or doom. Their stories weren't just entertainment, they were instruction manuals for life and death, teaching courage, caution, and the delicate balance between them. But the otherworld, that was the thread pulling it all together. It wasn't just a concept, it was a presence, felt in the shiver that ran down your spine on a misty morning or the way shadows danced when the firelight flickered just so. The otherworld wasn't distant or unreachable, it was here, just out of sight. Sometimes, a flicker in the corner of your vision felt like a doorway creaking open. And in this way, the Celts built their lives around the unseen, shaping rituals, songs, and festivals to honor what they could feel but not fully grasp. There was no line dividing the mundane from the magical, there were two sides of the same coin, spinning endlessly. Perhaps that's why their myths never grow old, why their whispers still carry on the winds of time. Yet, just when you think you've grasped their essence, another story rises from the shadows, tugging at you, pulling you further into their world. This is no ordinary tale, it is one carried on the backs of creatures as old as time itself, creatures who walked not just in legend but, perhaps, in the footsteps of those who first told these stories. The hounds are coming now, their cries echoing across the hills, and the scent of something ancient lingers in the air. Do you feel it? The night was thick with silence, broken only by the soft rustle of leaves and the distant cry of an animal. To a Celtic mind, that sound wasn't just a random echo of the forest. It was something more, a whisper of an unseen presence, a creature watching, waiting, reminding you that the world was alive in ways you couldn't always see. These beings weren't mere figments of imagination, they carried meaning, power, and sometimes a warning. The creatures of Celtic lore were more than stories. They were woven into the rhythm of everyday life. A farmer hearing the cry of a banshee might pause, his heart heavy, knowing it heralded death's approach. A child playing by a river would avoid the water's edge, warned of the kelpie waiting to pull the unsuspecting into its depths. These creatures weren't just cautionary tales, they were a living language through which the Celts interpreted the world around them. Every creature had a role, a place in the grand tapestry of existence. The Púca, that mischievous shapeshifter, might appear as a horse, a goat, or even a black cat, its antics both feared and respected. Crops that failed might be blamed on its antics, but a Púca treated kindly might also bless a field. It was a creature of duality, mirroring the unpredictable nature of life itself. And then there were the Dullahan, the terrifying headless riders who carried the weight of inevitability on their spectral steeds. Their presence wasn't just a tale to frighten children, but a stark reminder of life's fragility and the certainty of death. To see a Dullahan was to face mortality unflinchingly, a challenge the Celts accepted with a kind of grim reverence. These creatures shaped traditions, becoming guardians of sacred boundaries. The city, those ethereal fairy folk, weren't simply whimsical beings, they were protectors of the land. Their mounds and hills were left undisturbed, and offerings were made to ensure their goodwill. To disrespect the city was to court disaster, a broken cart, a failed harvest, or worse, a curse that could ripple through generations. Storytelling became the lifeblood of these creatures, preserving them as more than just memories. Around the fire, in the flickering glow of the flames, the old would speak of heroes who faced the Morrigan's dark omens, of lovers who fell for the Selkies' haunting beauty, and of battles where gods and giants clashed beneath storm-darkened skies. These tales weren't just entertainment, they were maps of the soul, guiding listeners through the complexities of honor, fear, love, and loss. The creatures weren't confined to the shadows of myth, they were alive in the ceremonies and rituals that marked the passage of time. Samhain, the festival where the veil between worlds stand, was filled with whispers of these beings. Fires were lit to ward off the wild hunt, a spectral cavalcade of hounds and horsemen led by a figure who could drag the living into the otherworld. Food and drink were left out, not as mere offerings but as acts of respect, recognizing that the creatures were as much a part of existence as the stars in the sky. Even in their festivals, the Celts honored this delicate balance between reverence and fear. Beltane fires crackled in the spring, their flames a prayer for protection against malevolent forces. Cattle were driven between them, not just for physical purification but to ensure they were guarded from the unseen dangers lurking in the shadows. But it wasn't just fear that these creatures inspired. They were also symbols of hope, transformation, and resilience. The Selkie, shedding its sealskin to walk on land, whispered of freedom and the longing for something beyond what we know. The Morrigan, fierce and unyielding, reminded warriors of the strength found in facing their own shadows. Even the smallest, like the leprechaun, carried wisdom, teaching that wit and cleverness could outshine brute strength. Over time, these creatures became more than stories, they became living metaphors for the struggles and triumphs of life itself. They reminded the Celts, and, by extension, us, that the world is layered, that beneath the ordinary lies something extraordinary. And in those layers, truths about human nature, our fears, desires, and hopes, are hidden like treasures waiting to be unearthed. But even as the fire burned low and the tales reached their end, there was always one more creature waiting, its story untold, its presence lingering just out of sight. For the Celts, the creatures weren't confined to the past, they were always just around the corner, waiting to step back into the world, waiting for someone to remember them. The soft patting of paws, the sound of breath in the dark, they're closer now. The hounds are stirring, and with them, the air grows electric, heavy with something ancient. Their eyes flash, and you can almost see the red glint of their ears. They're watching, and the forest holds its breath. A sudden gust of wind rippled through the towering oaks, carrying with it the faint scent of rain and something else, something unnameable, ancient, and alive. For the Celts, moments like this weren't coincidences, they were connections. The world wasn't a cold, indifferent expanse of earth and sky. It was alive, humming with energies both visible and unseen. The gods, the spirits, and the mortals, they were all threads in a single, infinite web, pulling and tugging at one another in ways that shaped existence itself. The gods weren't distant deities, seated on unreachable thrones. They walked among the people, breathed the same air, and felt the pulse of the same earth. Brigid was there in the warmth of the hearth fire, her touch in the soft bloom of spring flowers. Luffa's hand guided the sun, his brilliance igniting the courage of warriors and the creativity of craftsmen. The Celts didn't look up to their gods, they looked beside them, shoulder to shoulder, as kin and companions. Spirits, too, were never far. They lingered in the forests, danced on the edges of rivers, and whispered through the night air. The city, the fairy folk, weren't quaint figures of fancy. They were as real as the grass underfoot and as fickle as the weather. They could bless or curse with equal fervor, and their favor was not something to take for granted. Paths leading to their mounds were walked with care, and offerings were left as acts of respect: coins, milk, a fragment of bread, small gestures to acknowledge a much larger presence. Mortals weren't mere observers in this cosmic interplay. They were participants, partners in an eternal dance. The Celts believed that their lives mattered in the grand scheme, not as pawns, but as active contributors to the balance of the world. The farmer tilling the soil wasn't just growing crops, he was honoring Danu, the earth goddess who nurtured all life. The warrior entering battle wasn't just defending his people, he was embodying the fierce spirit of Cuchulainn, channeling the ferocity of the gods themselves. Death wasn't an end but a transformation, a step into another form of existence. The other world wasn't a far-off paradise or a place of torment, it was simply the next phase, as natural as the changing seasons. Ancestors didn't vanish, they lingered, watching over their descendants, their wisdom flowing through bloodlines like an unbroken river. And yet, this closeness to the divine didn't make life easier. If anything, it made it more fragile. Every action carried weight. To fell a tree without reason was to anger the spirits within it. To speak ill of the gods could bring calamity. But this wasn't fear, it was respect, an understanding that to live fully meant to acknowledge one's place within the grand, interconnected web. The interplay between gods, spirits, and mortals wasn't without conflict. Stories brimmed with tension, gods clashing with humans, spirits testing the limits of mortal will. There were tales of mortals who defied the gods and paid the price, like those who dared to challenge Luffa's unmatched brilliance. But there were also stories of mortals who rose to the occasion, who earned their place among the divine. The lines blurred, showing that divinity wasn't so far removed from humanity after all. This fluidity extended to the very fabric of the world. Boundaries were never fixed, they shifted and shimmered, especially during times of transition. Samhain was one such moment when the veil between this world and the other world grew so thin that spirits and mortals could cross freely. Fires were lit, not just to ward off darkness, but to acknowledge that this crossing wasn't a threat, it was a reminder of how closely the worlds were entwined. To the Celts, there was no such thing as isolation. The gods felt joy and sorrow just as mortals did. The spirits carried mischief and wisdom in equal measure. And humans? They held the power to shape their destiny, not alone, but with the ever-present forces of the divine and the mystical guiding their steps. It's in this understanding that we glimpse something eternal, a way of seeing the world not as separate pieces, but as one breathing, living whole. And just when you think you've caught the rhythm of it, a shadow flits across the corner of your vision. Was it a trick of the light? Or was it the city, watching silently, their eyes gleaming with a wisdom older than the stones? Perhaps it's neither, or perhaps it's both, but one thing is certain, the air is charged now, and the night feels alive. The brittle edges of an ancient manuscript crumbled under the touch of a cautious hand, revealing ink-stained whispers of gods, heroes, and worlds long forgotten. These pages, weathered by time and shadowed by mystery, are among the few remnants of a rich tapestry of Celtic mythology. Yet, they are only fragments, scraps of a culture that once thrived through words spoken under star-studded skies, around flickering hearth fires. The real stories weren't bound to parchment. They were carried in voices, passed down through generations, living and breathing in the hearts of those who told them. The manuscripts that survive are not merely documents, they are portals into a past so alive with spirit and song that even their decay cannot erase their significance. Take the Liber Gabala Erin, the Book of Invasions. It's not just a history of Ireland, it's a cosmic drama, recounting wave after wave of mythical beings who shaped the land. Giants, gods, and mortals intertwine in its pages, revealing an Ireland that was forged not just by physical forces, but by the will of the divine. Each invasion was a story of triumph and loss, of destiny and defiance, and through it all, the landscape itself seemed to absorb these tales, becoming sacred. And then there's the Mabinogion, that treasure chest of Welsh lore. In its verses, we meet Púca, Rhiannon, Bran the Blessed, and others whose lives straddle the line between mortal and mythical. These tales aren't just entertainment, they're echoes of a worldview where the mundane and the magical coexist, where the king of End might grant you favor or steal your soul. The Mabinogion feels like a song caught in a storm, each story laced with beauty and brutality, reminding us of how fragile and fierce life can be. Yet, these manuscripts, for all their value, are incomplete. Many were written down by Christian monks, their hands guided by a faith foreign to the stories they preserved. The gods of the Celts became saints, their sacred groves overshadowed by abbeys and churches. The monks didn't erase the old tales, but they transformed them, embedding traces of their own beliefs into the mythology. What survives is a hybrid, a melding of pagan wonder and Christian morality. And while it's easy to mourn what was lost, there's a haunting beauty in what remains, like a song half remembered but still capable of stirring the soul. But not all Celtic mythology is confined to ink and vellum. The oral traditions carried the heart of these stories long before the scribes began their work. Imagine a bard standing before a gathering, his voice rising and falling like the wind, his words painting pictures more vivid than any artist could render. These storytellers were more than entertainers, they were keepers of history, weaving memory and myth into a single, unbroken thread. Their songs didn't just tell of the past, they shaped the present, reinforcing bonds between the people and their gods, their land, and each other. Archaeology adds another layer to this tapestry, revealing evidence of the rituals, beliefs, and symbols that underpinned Celtic life. Stone carvings, bronze statues, and burial sites whisper of a world where art and spirituality were inseparable. The Gundestrup cauldron, for example, gleams with scenes of gods and beasts, hinting at stories we may never fully recover but can still feel in the silence of its images. Burial mounds and sacred wells speak of a people who believed in the continuity of life and the power of places where the veil between worlds was thin. The oral and physical traces often illuminate what the manuscripts cannot. They reveal how the Celts viewed time as cyclical, not linear, and how their myths were not static but evolving, shaped by each teller who breathed new life into them. A story could shift with the seasons, with the needs of the listener, or with the wisdom of the bard. This adaptability ensured that the myths survived, even as the world around them changed. But there's a fragility to this survival. The echoes are faint, and the shadows of what's been lost loom large. You can almost hear the sigh of the bards who sang their last songs, the rustle of leaves over sacred groves long since cut down. And yet, something lingers. A fragment of a tale, a line from a poem, the curve of a carving, they remind us that the Celtic spirit is not so easily silenced. In the stillness of an ancient forest or the soft glow of twilight on a forgotten hill, it's easy to imagine those stories stirring again. Somewhere, a river murmurs a forgotten name, a stone holds secrets etched by unseen hands, and a shadow moves where none should be. The past may be veiled, but it isn't gone. Something waits there, just beneath the surface, timeless and patient. The air was thick with silence, a strange, weighty kind of stillness that prickled the skin and quickened the pulse. Somewhere in the distance, a sound rose, a low, mournful baying, neither near nor far, yet everywhere all at once. It was the sound of the hounds of End, their cries piercing the veil between this world and the next. To hear them was to know that you stood on the edge of something vast, a boundary between life and death, light and shadow, mortal and eternal. And wasn't merely a place, it was an experience, a feeling of stepping into a world where the rules of existence bent and twisted like smoke. It wasn't heaven, nor was it hell. It was the other world, a realm of unparalleled beauty and unyielding mystery. For the Celts, and was a paradox, a land of eternal youth and boundless feasts, yet also a domain of shadows, where the spirits of the dead found their rest. It was ruled by Araun, a figure as enigmatic as the realm he governed. Araun was no ordinary king. His presence was commanding, yet not overtly cruel. He wasn't a tyrant, nor was he a gentle shepherd of souls. Instead, he embodied the balance of life's extremes, stirring yet fair, shadowed yet luminous. His voice, it was said, could soothe the fiercest of warriors or silence the most cunning of tricksters. His silver hair caught the light of an otherworld sun, and his eyes, dark as a raven's wing, seemed to hold the weight of countless lifetimes. Araun's hounds, the CWN, were no less remarkable. Snow white and spectral, with ears the color of fresh blood, they roamed the borderlands of existence. Their howls were unlike any earthly sound, resonating with a mournful beauty that froze hearts and stilled breath. These hounds were not mere beasts, they were heralds, their cries a warning that Anne's gates were near. To see them was to know that death, or perhaps something worse, was not far behind. Yet Araun and his hounds weren't harbingers of despair. In Celtic thought, death wasn't an ending but a transformation. And wasn't feared, it was respected. To journey there was to step into a world where the soul could find rest or renewal, depending on the paths it had walked. The hounds, with their haunting cries, weren't simply chasing souls, they were guiding them, ensuring they reached the gates of the otherworld intact. Stories whispered of mortals who crossed paths with Araun, often at a crossroads, or in the still, enchanted hours of the night. There was Púca, the prince of Dyft, who stumbled into Araun's domain and, through an act of loyalty and bravery, forged a bond with the otherworld king. For a year and a day, Púca lived as Araun, ruling and in his stead and defeating Araun's enemy, Halfdan. The tale wasn't just one of heroics, it was a lesson in trust, humility, and the intertwining of mortal and divine fates. But Araun wasn't always a figure of benevolence. In other tales, he appeared as a stern judge, his hounds relentless in their pursuit of the wicked. They would hunt the souls of those who had wronged the natural balance, their cries a haunting reminder that justice was inescapable, even beyond death. The Celts understood this duality, this interplay of mercy and retribution. It wasn't about punishment for its own sake, it was about maintaining harmony in a world where every action, every choice, left ripples in its wake. The boundaries of end were fluid, and sometimes they crept into the mortal world. On Samhain, when the veil between worlds thinned, the hounds' howls could be heard more clearly, their spectral forms glimpsed under a harvest moon. Farmers would leave offerings at their doorsteps, milk, bread, or meat, hoping to appease the hounds and their master. These gestures weren't born of fear but of understanding. Araun's domain wasn't separate from the mortal realm, it was its shadow, its mirror, a reflection of the unseen forces that shaped life itself. Even now, in the quiet of ancient forests or the desolate stretches of windswept hills, there are those who swear they've heard the CWN, a distant, mournful cry that raises the hair on your neck and makes the world feel suddenly immense and unknowable. Whether it's the wind or something older, who can say? But one thing is certain, wherever their cries echo, Araun is not far behind, watching, waiting, and reminding the world of the thin line between the seen and the unseen. Under the pale light of a waning moon, a figure stood still, breath caught in their throat, as a pack of spectral hounds emerged from the mist. Their coats were white as freshly fallen snow, glowing faintly against the darkness, but it was their ears that transfixed the watcher, crimson as blood, as if they had dipped their heads into the heart of some great and terrible truth. The sight was both mesmerizing and terrifying, an image that lingered long after the hounds had vanished, leaving behind only silence and the lingering scent of earth after rain. The white hounds with red ears were no ordinary creatures, they were symbols of something far greater. To the Celts, they represented the liminal spaces between life and death, between what is seen and what is felt. Their stark colors, white and red, weren't just striking, they carried layers of meaning, drawing the observer into a world where nothing was as simple as it seemed. White, the color of their fur, was a hue tied to purity, but not the innocence often associated with it in modern thought. It was a purity born of transcendence, of stepping beyond the mortal coil and into something eternal. White was the color of the otherworld, of the mists that shrouded and the ethereal glow of spirits who had passed beyond the constraints of the physical world. To see these hounds was to glimpse something not meant for mortal eyes, a reminder that the living and the dead are separated only by the thinnest of veils. And then there were the red ears, so vivid they seemed to drip with significance. Red was the color of life's essence, blood, passion, and the heartbeat of existence. It was also the color of sacrifice and violence, of endings and transformations. The juxtaposition of white and red on these hounds wasn't accidental. It was a visual metaphor for the balance the Celts so deeply revered: life and death, purity and passion, beginning and end. The hounds weren't just harbingers of death, they were guides, their red ears marking them as creatures tied to the threads of fate itself. To hear their cry was to know your path was being watched, perhaps redirected. The CWN and, as they were known, were said to pursue the souls of the departed, their howls echoing across the hills and through the forests, guiding the lost to Aron's domain. But they weren't merely trackers, they were mediators between worlds. Their cries, mournful yet oddly comforting, served as a bridge between the living and the dead. To encounter them was to confront the inevitability of your own fate, and to be reminded that death, while fearsome, was not an end but a transformation. Yet their symbolism went deeper than death alone. They were tied to fate itself, to the choices that weave the tapestry of existence. In their pursuit of souls, the hounds became a mirror for those they chased, reflecting the lives they had lived and the consequences of their actions. The red ears seemed to burn with the weight of judgment, though not in a moralistic sense. It wasn't about punishment or reward, but about balance, about ensuring that every thread in the cosmic web found its proper place. Their association with guidance was undeniable. In Celtic lore, to be followed by these hounds wasn't always a curse, it could be a calling. The hounds didn't hunt indiscriminately, they were drawn to those whose time had come or whose destinies needed alignment. Their presence often carried a message, whether to prepare for an inevitable crossing into or to reflect on the steps that had led to that moment. The vivid imagery of the white hounds with red ears also hinted at their connection to the otherworld cycles of renewal. White spoke of the soul's release from earthly bounds, while red symbolized the spark of energy that drives all change. Together, they embodied the endless interplay of stillness and movement, of peace and urgency. In their presence, one might feel both the quiet of eternity and the pulse of life's fierce momentum. But not all who saw the hounds were at the end of their lives. In some stories, they appeared as warnings, their cries urging the living to heed the delicate balance of their actions. A careless slight to the natural world, a broken oath, or an unchecked ambition, any of these could draw the hound's attention. They didn't punish, they reminded. Their colors, so stark and primal, were a signal to return to the harmony that the Celts believed governed existence. Even now, the thought of white hounds with red ears stirs something primal in the imagination. They remind us of the fragility of the barriers we build between life and death, between what we see and what we feel. Their cries, though long silenced by time, seem to echo in the rustle of leaves on a still night or the faint wail of the wind across an empty moor. And as they vanish into the mist, leaving behind no trace but the memory of their spectral forms, one can't help but feel the pull of their gaze, a reminder that every path leads somewhere, and every step leaves a mark on the unseen fabric of fate. The moon hung heavy in the sky, casting an otherworldly glow over the world below, as a storyteller whispered a tale of spectral hounds with snow-white fur and blood-red ears. Their cries, mournful and haunting, pierced the fabric of the night, echoing across centuries. This tale, ancient as the roots of the oaks, refused to be silenced. It leapt from the fireside of old Celtic bards into the ink of modern writers, becoming a thread woven through the stories that haunt and inspire today's culture. The hounds of Around, the CWN have slipped quietly but unmistakably into the fabric of modern folklore and literature. Their essence, shaped by the weight of ancient Celtic belief, has taken on new forms, sometimes distant from their origins yet always carrying that chilling, otherworldly spark. They are no longer confined to the mists of Ind. They roam freely through the pages of books, the flicker of screens, and the whispers of urban legends. One of the most recognizable echoes of Around's hounds can be found in the spectral black dogs of English folklore, like the infamous Black Shuck. These phantom creatures, often described with glowing red eyes and the ability to appear and vanish at will, owe much to the imagery of the CWNN. Though their fur may be black instead of white, and their role often leans more toward terror than guidance, the connection is clear. They are reminders of death and fate, creatures that exist just beyond the reach of understanding, rooted in the same primal fear and reverence for the unknown. In literature, these spectral hounds have inspired countless interpretations. Arthur Conan Doyle's The Hound of the Baskervilles stands as a towering example, its titular beast a blend of myth and Gothic imagination. Though the hound in Doyle's tale is ultimately revealed to be a fabrication, its eerie presence in the misty moors and the sheer weight of its legend feel deeply tied to the spirit of Around's hounds. It is a creature born of fear and superstition, embodying the collision of mortal life with something vast and unknowable. Modern fantasy writers have also drawn upon the myth. Authors like Neil Gaiman, whose work often dances between the mundane and the mythical, have crafted worlds where the influence of such creatures is unmistakable. Gaiman's American Gods and the Sandman series both feature moments where the boundary between life and death is rendered vivid, often with the presence of creatures or figures that guide, pursue, or guard. The hounds of Around, with their liminal nature, seem to haunt the edges of such tales, even if not explicitly named. In urban fantasy and supernatural thrillers, hounds as emissaries of death or guardians of the afterlife have become a recurring motif. Their forms may shift. They might be sleek, modern manifestations of the CWN or shadowy figures hunting in dark city streets, but their purpose remains, to serve as symbols of inevitability, transition, and the thin line between worlds. Even in popular culture, the influence of Around's hounds lingers. In video games like the Witcher series, spectral hounds are linked to the Wild Hunt, a force that rides the skies, much like the original myths of Around's hunting pack. The Wild Hunt itself, a pan-European legend, is deeply entwined with the imagery of spectral hounds pursuing souls, and the echoes of Celtic lore ripple through its every iteration. In the Elder Scrolls games, too, ghostly dogs and wolves serve as companions or adversaries, their spectral nature a nod to the ancient myths that inspired them. In contemporary TV and film, the myth's shadow persists. The haunting allure of spectral hounds appears in shows like Supernatural, where ghostly dogs often signal death, or Game of Thrones, where dire wolves evoke a similar primal connection to the wild and the mystical. These interpretations may differ wildly from the CWN and of old, but they retain the essence, the inescapable presence of something ancient and unyielding. Outside fiction, the idea of spectral hounds remains alive in urban legends and local ghost stories. People still report seeing phantom dogs on lonely roads or hearing disembodied howls in the dead of night. These tales often borrow elements from the ancient lore of the CWN and, even if the storytellers are unaware of their origins. The imagery of the white hound with red ears has been reshaped, perhaps, but it has not faded. It lingers, a whisper of the otherworld in the modern imagination. What makes Around's hounds so enduring is their duality. They are terrifying yet strangely comforting, harbingers of death yet guides to a promised peace. This complexity allows them to be reshaped without losing their essence. Whether they appear as the mournful hounds of the moors, the spectral guides of fantasy realms, or the shadows stalking urban myths, their presence reminds us of the timeless dance between life and the unknown. The hounds of Around may have originated in a world where magic and nature were inseparable, but they have found a home in our modern stories. They are proof that myths don't die, they evolve, their howls echoing through time, as haunting and beautiful now as they were under the moonlit skies of ancient Wales. The shadows stretched long over the rolling hills, and the air seemed to hum with anticipation. A rustle in the undergrowth made a traveler pause, heart racing, as a dark figure emerged, a horse, sleek and black, its eyes glinting with an unsettling intelligence. Yet, as the traveler stepped closer, the figure shifted. In the blink of an eye, the horse was gone, replaced by a hare bounding into the twilight. This was no ordinary animal, it was the Púca, a creature of countless faces and infinite mischief, born of myth and bound to no single form. The Púca is one of the most fascinating and unpredictable beings in Celtic lore, a spirit of transformation and mystery. Its very nature defies boundaries, slipping through the cracks of certainty with a sly grin. Few creatures command such a mix of fear and admiration, for the Púca could be a benefactor one moment and a trickster the next, its motives as fluid as the shapes it wore. In its many tales, the Púca appears in forms both familiar and unsettling. A black horse with a wild mane and glowing eyes, it often lured unsuspecting riders onto its back, only to gallop wildly through the countryside, leaping over streams and cliffs. By dawn, it would throw them off into a muddy field or a pile of leaves, unharmed but shaken. Yet even this mischief seemed more playful than malicious, as if the Púca sought to remind humans of their frailty in the face of the untamed. But the Púca wasn't confined to equine form. It could just as easily take the shape of a hare, darting through moonlit meadows, its movements too quick, too purposeful to be those of an ordinary animal. Farmers whispered that to see such a hare near their fields was a sign that the Púca was watching, perhaps deciding whether to bless or curse their harvest. Some legends told of the Púca appearing as a sleek, dark dog with luminous eyes, its bark echoing with an otherworldly resonance. In other tales, it became a raven, its wings whispering secrets as it flew overhead. Yet its shape-shifting wasn't limited to animals. The Púca could also take on human guise, though its true nature was always betrayed by some small detail, a glimmer of mischief in its eyes, a shadow that moved in ways it shouldn't, or a laugh that lingered too long. In this form, it might approach a traveler at dusk, offering cryptic warnings or riddles that seemed nonsensical until they unfolded into truth. Those who encountered the Púca in human form often spoke of its unsettling charisma, a presence that felt both inviting and dangerous, like the edge of a storm. The stories of the Púca's deeds are as varied as its forms. In one well-known tale, a farmer named Podrig was startled to find a magnificent black horse grazing in his field. Against his better judgment, he saddled the horse and rode it into town. But as the ride continued, the horse began to speak, its voice deep and melodic, offering riddles and advice about Podrig's crops. Though frightened, Podrig listened, and by following the Púca's cryptic guidance, he enjoyed a bountiful harvest that year. Yet the next time he sought the horse, it was gone, leaving only hoof prints that vanished into the forest. Not all tales painted the Púca as a helpful spirit. Some described it as a bringer of chaos, especially on Samhain, when the boundaries between worlds grew thin. On that night, the Púca was said to roam freely, souring milk, scattering livestock, and playing tricks on anyone who dared wander too far from the safety of their hearth. Farmers would leave offerings, grains, fruits, or milk, to appease the creature, hoping to earn its favor or at least avoid its ire. But even in its most mischievous tales, the Púca seemed to operate within a strange code. Its tricks rarely caused lasting harm, and its warnings, though cryptic, often carried truths that could not be ignored. It was as if the Púca existed to challenge the complacency of mortals, to remind them that the world was vast, unpredictable, and alive with forces beyond their understanding. There is a tale from the rugged coasts of Ireland that speaks of a fisherman who met the Púca on a stormy night. The creature appeared first as a gull, then as a man, and finally as a seal, each form carrying the same glinting, knowing eyes. It warned the fisherman not to set sail, hinting at a storm that would claim many lives. The fisherman heeded the warning and lived to see the dawn, though others who dismissed the strange encounter did not. The Púca's message was clear: respect the rhythms of nature, or face the consequences. The Púca's shapeshifting was not just a display of power, but a symbol of its liminal nature. It existed between worlds, animal and human, mortal and otherworldly, benefactor and trickster. Its fluid forms reflected the Celtic understanding of life as ever-changing, a dance of chaos and order. The Púca was a reminder that nothing in the world is static, and even the most ordinary-seeming moments could hide a touch of the extraordinary. Even now, in the quiet corners of the Irish countryside, some claim to have glimpsed the Púca. A black horse grazing alone, a hare watching with uncanny stillness, or a shadowy figure disappearing just as you turn your head, these sightings are rare but persistent. The Púca, it seems, has not been confined to the pages of legend. It continues to slip through the cracks of the everyday, a shapeshifter who refuses to be forgotten. And just as it has for centuries, it reminds those who encounter it to look closer, to question what they think they know, and to be ready for the unexpected at every turn. The forest stood silent under a canopy of stars, its usual nighttime hum replaced by an eerie stillness. A figure appeared in the shadows, a horse, dark as midnight, its mane flowing like a cascade of ink. Its eyes, however, gleamed with a strange, knowing light. To the farmer watching from the edge of his field, it seemed almost inviting. And yet, something in its posture, the deliberate tilt of its head, whispered caution. He knew the stories. The Púca. Was it here to offer wisdom, or to ruin him? The Púca's nature has always been an enigma, straddling the fine line between benefactor and tormentor. This duality is its essence, a creature impossible to categorize. To some, it is a spirit of guidance, offering cryptic advice that can change a life. To others, it is a bringer of chaos, sowing confusion and disarray wherever it treads. But whether it wears the guise of a protector or a trickster, the Púca always leaves its mark, reminding those who encounter it of the precarious balance between fortune and folly. In one tale, a humble villager named Owen encountered the Púca while returning home after a long day in the fields. It appeared as a sleek, black horse, its eyes glinting with mischief. The Púca beckoned him closer, lowering its great head as if to allow him to mount. Though hesitant, Owen could not resist the creature's unspoken invitation. As soon as he climbed onto its back, the Púca bolted, galloping faster than any mortal horse could. It raced through the night, leaping over rivers and cliffs, its wild energy a blend of exhilaration and terror. When it finally threw Owen off at the edge of a forest, he found himself unharmed but disoriented, far from home. It was only later, as dawn broke, that he realized the Púca's purpose. A massive storm had struck his village in the night, leveling homes and destroying fields. Had he stayed, he might not have survived. The Púca had saved him, albeit in its own chaotic way. Yet Owen could not shake the memory of that ride, the way the Púca's laughter had echoed in the wind, both joyful and cruel. This tale, like many others, reflects the Púca's unpredictable nature. It does not fit neatly into the role of hero or villain, its actions are guided by motives beyond human comprehension. Sometimes, its tricks are harmless pranks, rearranging tools, leading travelers astray, or souring milk. Other times, they carry profound consequences, forcing individuals to confront truths they might otherwise ignore. The Púca's benevolence often comes cloaked in chaos, as if to remind mortals that blessings are rarely straightforward. In another story, a farmer struggling with a failing harvest stumbled upon the Púca in the form of a hare. The creature, silent and watchful, led him to a patch of untouched land rich with fertile soil. Though wary, the farmer followed its lead and sowed his seeds there, yielding a crop that saved his family from starvation. Yet, when he returned to thank the creature, the land had turned barren, and the Púca was gone. Was it a test of faith, a fleeting gift, or simply another of the Púca's whims? But the Púca's malevolence is just as legendary. Farmers feared its appearance on Samhain, when it was said to roam freely, souring crops and playing cruel tricks. In these tales, the Púca embodies the untamed forces of nature, wild, destructive, and indifferent to human suffering. To encounter it during these times was to face the raw, unyielding power of the world, a reminder of humanity's fragile place within it. Even its physical transformations reflect its dual nature. As a horse, it could offer strength and guidance or lead riders to perilous fates. As a raven, it might whisper warnings or foretell doom. As a human, it could provide wisdom veiled in riddles or lead one into an inescapable trap. Each form carried its own blend of allure and danger, its intentions as fluid as the shapes it wore. What sets the Púca apart from other trickster figures in mythology is this balance of light and shadow. It is not purely malevolent, like the Norse Loki in his more destructive moments, nor wholly benevolent, like some interpretations of the Native American coyote. The Púca exists in a space between extremes, a being that defies human morality. Its tricks are neither random nor entirely purposeful. They are reflections of a deeper, more primal order, one that views chaos and creation as two sides of the same coin. This ambiguity made the Púca both feared and respected in Celtic culture. Offerings of food and drink were left out to appease it, a gesture of humility and acknowledgement. People recognized that the Púca, like nature itself, could not be controlled or fully understood. To engage with it was to accept its unpredictability, to step willingly into a dance of risk and reward. Even now, the Púca's spirit lingers in stories and whispers. It remains a symbol of the unknown, a reminder that life's greatest gifts often come disguised as challenges, and its sharpest lessons are learned in moments of vulnerability. The Púca does not simply exist to entertain or terrify, it forces those who encounter it to confront the complexities of existence, where nothing is ever as simple as it seems. And so, as the traveler watches the Púca retreat into the darkness, its form already shifting into something new, they are left with a choice. To fear it, to thank it, or perhaps to simply marvel at the mystery it leaves behind. The air crackled with a chill that hinted at the turning of seasons, the fields lying quiet after their final yield. Shadows grew longer, and the sky seemed heavier as the veil between worlds thinned. It was Samhain, the night when the year cycle teetered on the edge of death and rebirth. Fires blazed on hilltops, flickering against the dark, but even their warmth couldn't banish the feeling of something watching. Somewhere out there, hidden among the misty moors or the dense woods, the Púca was said to roam freely, its presence as inevitable as the end of autumn. For the Celts, Samhain was a time of endings and beginnings, a moment to honor the dead while preparing for the cold months ahead. It was also a time of uncertainty, when boundaries blurred, not just between the living and the dead, but between safety and danger, comfort and chaos. And no figure embodied this duality better than the Púca, a creature that seemed to thrive on the shifting tides of the season. The Púca held a peculiar place in the lore of Samhain. It was neither a figure of pure terror nor one of comfort. Instead, it walked the liminal space between, embodying the wild, untamed energy of the season. Farmers would speak in hushed tones of the Púca's visits during harvest time, when it was said to take possession of any crops left in the fields after Samhain night. These were known as Púca's share, and they were considered untouchable, cursed by the creature's otherworldly touch. But even in its seemingly capricious nature, the Púca served a purpose. The act of leaving behind this portion of the harvest was more than mere superstition, it was an acknowledgement of forces beyond human control, a ritual of humility in the face of nature's power. By surrendering a share of the bounty to the Púca, farmers sought to ensure their fields would be fertile again in the spring, their gesture of respect placating the unpredictable spirit. Not all tales of the Púca during Samhain were steeped in foreboding. In some regions, it was believed that the creature would offer gifts to those who treated it kindly. Farmers told of finding their fields mysteriously tilled overnight, the soil turned and ready for planting after winter. Others spoke of hearing the Púca's voice on the wind, offering cryptic advice about the coming season, warnings of storms, predictions of a lean winter, or suggestions for what crops to plant. These tales gave the Púca a role not just as a trickster, but as a guardian of sorts, one whose chaos ultimately served to maintain balance. And yet, its mischief was never far. On Samhain night, travelers were warned to stay close to home, lest they encounter the Púca in one of its many guises. A horse might appear on a lonely road, tempting the unwary onto its back for a wild, bone-rattling ride. Or a dark figure might offer riddles or bargains, its intentions impossible to discern. Even those who avoided direct encounters weren't entirely safe. The Púca was said to sour milk in the barns, scatter livestock, and play tricks on those who dared to neglect its offerings. The connection between the Púca and the harvest extended beyond Samhain itself. As a creature tied to the rhythms of nature, the Púca's presence was felt throughout the agricultural cycle. It was a symbol of the delicate balance between plenty and scarcity, its appearance a reminder that every harvest depended not just on human effort, but on forces far beyond human control. To ignore this was to invite disaster, a lesson the Púca taught with both its blessings and its tricks. In some tales, the Púca's association with the harvest took on an almost sacred quality. It was said that on Samhain night, the creature would roam the fields, transforming the last grains into a potent drink. Known as Púca's brew, this mysterious elixir was said to bring visions of the future to those brave enough to partake. Some believed it was a gift, a way of preparing for the challenges ahead. Others saw it as a test, its visions as likely to haunt as to help. Either way, the brew reinforced the Púca's role as a mediator between worlds, a creature that offered glimpses of truth through the lens of its own chaotic nature. Even today, echoes of the Púca's role in seasonal celebrations can be felt. The traditions of Samhain, with their mix of reverence and revelry, have evolved into modern Halloween, but the underlying themes remain. The sense of mystery, the acknowledgement of unseen forces, the celebration of life's cyclical nature, all these reflect the spirit of the Púca, a creature that continues to haunt the edges of our collective imagination. And as the fires burned low on Samhain night, their embers casting fleeting shadows across the land, one could almost sense the Púca watching. Perhaps it lingered in the shape of a crow perched on a distant branch, or as a fleeting shadow just beyond the firelight. It was there, as it had always been, a reminder that even in the quiet of harvest's end, the wild heart of the world still beats, untamed and eternal. The wind howled through the desolate hills, carrying with it a sound that sent chills down the spines of those who heard it. A mournful wail, high and keening, pierced the stillness of the night. It was not the cry of an animal or the wind's whistle through the trees, it was something far older, something that seemed to rise from the very earth. Those who recognized it knew what it foretold. The Banshee had spoken. In Irish lore, the Banshee, or Bean City, meaning woman of the fairy mound, is a harbinger of death. She is not death itself, but its messenger, tied intrinsically to families of noble descent. Her cry, known as the Caoinid, is both a warning and a lament, a sound so raw and haunting that it seems to bypass the ears and settle directly in the soul. Yet, like the cry itself, the Banshee's origins and nature are shrouded in mystery and variation. The Banshee's roots can be traced to the ancient Celtic belief in the city, the supernatural beings associated with mounds or hills that dotted the Irish landscape. These mounds were thought to be portals to the otherworld, a realm of gods, spirits, and the dead. The Bean City was one of these spirits, bound to the mortal realm by a peculiar duty, to mourn the impending death of those she was connected to. Her ties were often familial, and in some stories, she was linked specifically to the 5 great Gaelic families, O'Brien, O'Connor, O'Neill, O'Grady, and Kavanagh, though the tales later expanded to include others. Her appearance is as varied as her cries. In some stories, she is a beautiful young woman, her hair flowing like silver moonlight, her face pale but radiant, and her eyes red from weeping. In others, she is an old crone, stooped and cloaked, her skeletal fingers clutching at her tattered shawl. In both guises, she carries an air of sorrow and inevitability, a figure both ethereal and deeply unsettling. Yet, she is rarely malevolent. Her presence is a reminder, not a curse, and her grief is genuine, even as it heralds loss. The Scottish counterpart of the Banshee, the Bean Nye, shares many similarities but has its own unique elements. Unlike the Irish Banshee, who is heard but rarely seen, the Bean Nye often appears by streams, washing the blood-stained clothes of those about to die. Her name means washerwoman, and her task is as grim as her appearance. Small and haggard, she is often described with webbed feet and a grotesque, otherworldly face. To encounter her is to witness a premonition of death, her actions a silent testament to fate. Yet even the Bean Nye is not purely a figure of horror. Some stories suggest that if one is brave enough to approach her and ask the right questions, she may reveal the name of the doomed and even grant the opportunity to avert the death. This small thread of agency makes her a complex figure, one who offers both dread and the faintest glimmer of hope. The variations of the Banshee across Celtic regions highlight the cultural nuances within these shared traditions. In Wales, for example, there is the Cyhyrith, a ghostly wailed herd near rivers or along the coast, signaling an approaching death. Unlike the Irish and Scottish figures, the Cyhyrith is rarely associated with a specific family and is more of a communal omen. Its cries are often said to mimic the sounds of water, soft and murmuring at first, then rising to a chilling crescendo. In Manx folklore, the banshee appears as the banshee, similar in role and nature but more closely tied to local myths of fairies and spirits. The Isle of Man's rich tapestry of supernatural lore weaves the banshee into a broader narrative of otherworldly beings, blending her story with that of other haunting figures like the Glashtan and the Mungerveji. These regional differences suggest that while the banshee and her counterparts are distinct, they all stem from a shared Celtic worldview that saw death not as an abrupt end, but as part of a continuum. The banshee's role was not to frighten but to prepare, to warn the living and to guide the soul of the deceased into the next phase of existence. Over time, the banshee's image has evolved, influenced by Christianity, colonialism, and modernization. In some interpretations, she became conflated with angels of death or seen as a figure of retribution rather than mourning. Yet, in her oldest tales, she remains a deeply human figure despite her otherworldly origins. Her grief, her voice, her connection to family, all of these traits ground her in the universal experience of loss. And so, when the wailing cry echoes through the hills, it carries with it more than just a warning of death. It holds a history, a legacy of belief and storytelling that has survived centuries. The banshee, whether as a radiant mourner, a ghastly washerwoman, or a disembodied voice, continues to remind us of the fragility of life and the power of myth to give shape to the unknown. The sound rose like a gust through the valleys, piercing the stillness with a cry so haunting it felt alive. It was not just a noise, it was a presence, raw and aching, that settled into the bones of those who heard it. For generations, this wail had signaled one thing: loss was near. The banshee's cry was not merely a sound but a ceremony of sorrow, a harbinger of grief that bound families and clans together in a shared reckoning with mortality. In Celtic traditions, the concept of family was sacred, its bonds reaching not just across the living but also into the spiritual realms of ancestors and kin. The banshee, or Bean City, stood as a bridge between these worlds, her presence a testament to the enduring ties of blood and lineage. Unlike many other supernatural beings, the banshee did not wander aimlessly, she was tied explicitly to families, her mournful role woven into the very fabric of their identity. Her appearance was never random. It was said that the banshee cried only for families of noble descent, those with long, storied histories etched into the land itself. The great Gaelic houses of O'Brien, O'Connor, O'Neill, O'Grady, and Kavanagh were among the clans thought to be under her watchful eye. In these families, the banshee's cry was both feared and respected, for it meant that one of their own was about to pass into the otherworld. But her role was more than a warning, it was a grieving. The banshee did not weep out of malice or indifference, her sorrow was genuine, an extension of the family's collective pain. Her wail, called the Ceoinid, mirrored the traditional keening performed by human mourners during funerals. These women, known as being Ceoinid, would sing lamentations that expressed the depth of the family's loss, their cries weaving grief into a tangible, communal experience. The banshee's cries were a supernatural echo of this tradition, an otherworldly lament that reminded families of the inevitability of death while honoring the soul departing this life. For the clans, the banshee's wail carried an unspoken message: prepare. Death was not seen as an end but a transition, and the rituals surrounding it were crucial to ensuring the deceased's safe passage to the otherworld. The banshee's cry often spurred families into action, prompting them to gather, to reconcile old grievances, and to fortify their bonds in the face of impending loss. It was a call to unity in the face of the ultimate separation. Yet, the banshee's role was not always one of sorrow. In some tales, her presence was viewed as an act of care, even protection. She was not merely a harbinger of death but a guide, ensuring that the departing soul would not be lost or forgotten. Her connection to the family was deeply personal, as though she carried the weight of their lineage on her spectral shoulders. Some believed she was an ancestral spirit herself, a woman from the family's distant past who had taken on this eternal role to watch over her descendants. Even in clans that didn't claim noble status, the banshee's symbolism resonated. She became a figure of collective mourning, her cry an acknowledgement of the shared human experience of loss. In the close-knit communities of Ireland and Scotland, where families were interconnected through marriage, trade, and tradition, the banshee's wail could ripple through entire villages. It was a sound that reminded everyone of their mortality, a unifying force that called people to support one another in times of grief. The banshee's role in familial traditions extended beyond the immediate moment of loss. Her presence reinforced the importance of ancestry, of remembering those who came before. In Celtic culture, the dead were never truly gone. They remained part of the living world, their spirits woven into the land, the seasons, and the stories passed down through generations. The banshee's cry was a reminder to honor these connections, to keep the memory of the departed alive. But like all symbols, the banshee's meaning could shift. For some, her wail became a source of dread, a harbinger of inescapable doom. The rise of Christianity in Celtic regions added layers to her story, with some viewing her as a sinful spirit condemned to wander for eternity. Yet even in these interpretations, her role as a mourner persisted. Her cries, though unsettling, still carried the weight of sorrow, a reflection of the grief that binds humanity. Today, the banshee endures as a symbol of loss and love intertwined. Her cry is the sound of grief made visible, a reminder that mourning is not something to be feared, but something to be felt, deeply and fully. She stands as a testament to the enduring power of family, of connection, and of the rituals that help us navigate the most difficult transitions in life. And though the hills may seem quieter now, and the old families scattered or forgotten, the banshee's voice still lingers. It whispers through the stories told around hearths, through the memories of those who remember the weight of loss. Even in silence, her presence is felt, a shadow on the edge of our understanding, a reminder that grief, though painful, is a sign of love that never fades. The streets were alive with the hum of city life, but there, in the shadows of the alley, something was wrong. A sharp, desperate wail sliced through the noise, echoing off the concrete walls, sending a shiver down the spine of anyone who heard it. It wasn't the sound of a person in distress, it was something primal, haunting, like a cry from beyond. Those who dared to listen knew the tale. The banshee had left the hills of Ireland and Scotland, and she had found new ground to roam. Once confined to the misty moors and winding rural roads of Celtic lands, the banshee has found a new life in the modern world. As the world urbanized and myth merged with the unknown, the cry of the banshee transformed, evolving from a harbinger of death within the close-knit family to a more ambiguous and unsettling figure, reflecting the anxieties of contemporary life. In the stories of today, the banshee has adapted, sometimes subtle, sometimes loud, her wail still carrying with it the same sense of impending doom but now playing out on the fringes of the everyday. Where once the banshee's cry signaled a death in the family, now it signifies something broader, an omen of disaster, loss, or warning. And the modern banshee is no longer just a figure of Celtic origin, she has woven herself into the fabric of urban legends, appearing in the darkness of the city, in the flickering lights of late-night highways, and the spaces where folklore meets fear. In some places, she's become something of a ghostly figure on the streets, her wail now heard not as a foretelling of a family death, but as an eerie announcement of tragedy or misfortune. The banshee's traditional connection to noble bloodlines has weakened over time, and now, her cry seems to transcend lineage, instead tapping into a universal fear of loss. Whether it's the cry heard after a brutal accident on the highway, or the wail that rises from the depths of an abandoned house at night, modern interpretations often place the banshee as a more universal symbol of loss and misfortune, a grim reminder that death can strike anywhere, at any time. But the transformation doesn't stop there. Urban legends have woven new layers onto the banshee myth, placing her squarely in the realm of modern horror. She has become a figure in movies, books, and television shows, often portrayed not as a mourner, but as a malevolent force whose cry is one of vengeance rather than sorrow. She haunts abandoned buildings, lurks in dark alleys, and crosses the thin line between the living and the dead. Her wail no longer sounds just at the moment of death's arrival. In these stories, the banshee becomes the source of death, her cry marking the end of something, whether it's a life, a relationship, or a dream. In many horror stories, the banshee's appearance signals not just the imminent death of a person, but an unfolding catastrophe, whether it's a natural disaster, a violent crime, or a spiritual reckoning. In these modern versions, she serves less as a protector of the family and more as a force of reckoning, sometimes even being depicted as a vengeful spirit who seeks to right an ancient wrong or fulfill an unfinished purpose. Her supernatural wail now takes on new significance, often tied to the darkness of human nature and the consequences of greed, betrayal, or lost innocence. The banshee's cry also echoes through popular culture in more subtle ways, her wail adapted to fit the context of modern fears. Her traditional role as a figure tied to specific families or lineages is often blurred, with her becoming a symbol for anyone who experiences personal loss. From the sounds that echo through hospital hallways at night to the unsettling moments in movies or TV shows, the modern banshee is less about lineage and more about the personal, internal experience of fear, grief, and the fragility of life. She stands as an ominous reminder that death and destruction are universal and inevitable, that no one is exempt from the agony of loss. Yet, even in these modern retellings, the banshee still carries with her an air of mourning, albeit a more existential form of sorrow. Her wail is no longer just for one family but for all who hear it, a cry that transcends time and space, carrying with it the weight of human suffering, no matter where it manifests. She has become an icon of grief, one that resonates with the modern mind, tapping into universal fears that seem to grow louder with each passing generation. The banshee's transition from myth to urban legend speaks to something deeper within us, the desire to make sense of the world's uncertainties, the need for a figure who both warns us and reminds us of what lies beyond. The banshee, like all great myths, adapts and evolves, but at her core, she remains a figure that resonates with the soul's deepest fear, the certainty of death and the grief that follows. As she wails into the modern night, she reminds us that we are still bound to the ancient rhythms of loss, that in the heart of the city or the solitude of the countryside, we are never truly free from the cry that once echoed through the hills. The sea was alive with mystery, its surface shimmering under the moonlight, hiding secrets beneath its depths. On the shore, the wind carried the scent of salt and seaweed, but there was something else, an intangible longing in the air, as if the sea itself were sighing, waiting for something to unfold. It was then, in the hushed moments between the waves, that she appeared, a woman with the heart of a seal, her eyes wide and unearthly, staring into the soul of anyone who dared to meet her gaze. She was a Selkie, a creature both human and animal, a spirit of the ocean bound by ancient rules. In the mythological traditions of Scotland, Ireland, and parts of Scandinavia, the Selkies are creatures of incredible beauty and mystery, able to transform from seals into humans. But the Selkie story is not one of simple magic, it is one of love, sacrifice, and the deep sorrow of separation. The Selkie's tale is woven into the very fabric of the sea, a place where the boundaries between the human world and the otherworld are thin, and where the heart's desires can be as fluid and shifting as the tides themselves. The most enduring Selkie stories are those of love, love between a human and a Selkie, a love that spans the divide between land and sea. In many of these stories, the Selkie is lured onto land by the warmth of the human world, sometimes through the clever hands of a fisherman or a lonely soul seeking connection. Once on land, the Selkie sheds her seal skin, transforming into a human woman, radiant and full of grace. It is here that the tale often begins, two worlds meeting, the impossible becoming real. At first, the human and the Selkie fall in love as though they were meant to be. They dance in the warmth of the sun, share intimate moments by the fire, and dream together of a life that is filled with happiness and understanding. But as time passes, the tension between these two worlds grows. The Selkie's love for the human is deep and true, but her heart is also bound to the sea, to the waters that called her home long before her human lover ever came into her life. Her transformation, no matter how temporary, is a reminder of the pull of the ocean, the wild freedom she cannot leave behind. The tragic twist of the Selkie tale is inevitable. The Selkie sealskin, hidden somewhere on the shore, becomes the key to her return to the sea. If the human lover finds it and hides it, the Selkie is trapped in the human world, unable to return to her true form. But in many stories, the hiding of the skin is an act of betrayal, a way of forcing the Selkie into a life she didn't choose. In some versions, the Selkie's love for her captor is genuine, but her heart always longs for the ocean, and the price of her love is the sacrifice of her own nature. In other tales, the Selkies' transformation is voluntary, driven by the strength of her feelings for the human. Yet even in these stories, the eventual return to the sea looms large, for the sea is always calling. The Selkies' love for the human is often tragic because it is fleeting, subject to the rhythms of nature and the eternal pull of the ocean. And when the time comes for the Selkie to return to the sea, whether by choice or force, the human lover is left heartbroken, always yearning for a love that transcended the boundaries of his world but could never truly be his. The nature of the Selkies' love is inherently bound to the idea of transformation, of becoming something else entirely in order to fulfill a need. In many stories, the transformation is not just physical, it is emotional and psychological. The Selkie, with her dual identity, embodies the tension between freedom and attachment, between the wild, unbounded nature of the ocean and the structure and security of human relationships. She is a symbol of the eternal longing for both love and independence, two desires that cannot always coexist in harmony. In the tragic iterations of the Selkie tale, the love between the human and the Selkie is one-sided, or it is never enough to overcome the inevitable divide between the two worlds. The Selkie's love, although deep, cannot replace the love she feels for the ocean, for the freedom of the sea that calls her with its vast, eternal embrace. The human lover, though well-meaning and often deeply attached to the Selkie, cannot fill the space in her heart that only the sea can. But there are also versions of the tale where the Selkie and her lover find a way to reconcile their differences. These stories are rarer, but they do exist. In some, the human lover learns to live with the knowledge that his Selkie will always return to the sea, and rather than try to trap her, he accepts the transient nature of their love. Their relationship becomes one of mutual respect, understanding, and bittersweet affection, as the lover knows that the Selkie's heart belongs both to him and to the ocean. The Selkie story is one of longing, both the yearning to belong and the desire to be free. Her love is powerful but impossible to contain, just as the ocean itself is wild and untamable. Her relationship with the human world is one of beauty and heartache, a reminder that love, no matter how pure or true, is not always enough to bridge the gap between two worlds. And so, as the waves crash against the rocks, and the saltwater mist rises to meet the air, the Selkie remains a figure of both beauty and sadness. She is a symbol of love lost and found, of freedom and captivity, and of the delicate balance between human connection and the untamable forces of nature. The stories of the Selkie continue to echo through the generations, their themes of transformation and love touching the hearts of those who hear them, reminding us all of the complex nature of love, and the inevitable pull of the sea. The horizon blurred as the waves curled and crashed, their endless rhythm speaking of ancient secrets held deep beneath the surface. The sea was never just water. It was something more, something ancient, sacred, and alive. For the Celts, the oceans, rivers, and lakes were not mere physical spaces, they were pathways, doorways to another world. To them, the sea wasn't just a body of water, it was a portal to the other world, a realm that lay just beyond the reach of mortal senses, but was always present, shimmering at the edges of perception. And it was through the sea, through the water itself, that creatures like the Selkie connected both to the mortal world and to the mystical realms beyond. The Selkie's existence, half seal, half human, embodies this connection. She is both a product of the sea and a visitor to the land, caught in the in-between, tethered to both realms in ways that mere humans could never fully understand. But the Selkie is not alone in this relationship with the sea. In Celtic mythology, water held a special, almost divine significance. It was both a source of life and a boundary that separated the living from the dead, the seen from the unseen. The sea was a liminal space, where the veil between worlds thinned, allowing the spirits of the dead to travel to the other world and the gods to move between realms. The Celts believed that the other world was not some far-off place, but one that coexisted with the human world, hidden just out of sight. And the sea, with its vast, unknowable depths, was seen as the very gateway to that world. It was through the waters that the souls of the dead were carried, and it was within the depths of the ocean that beings like the Selkie could slip in and out of the human world. The ocean was both a physical and metaphysical boundary, the edge of what could be known and what could never be understood. In the stories of the Selkie, this relationship between water and the otherworld becomes clear. The Selkie's transformation from seal to human is not just a simple change in form, it is a passage from one world to another. Her seal skin, when she sheds it, is not merely a costume, it is a symbol of her true nature, a connection to the deep waters and the realm that lies beneath them. When she returns to the sea, it is not just a return to the waters, it is a return to the otherworld itself, to the ancient, mystical forces that govern the seas and the unseen realms beyond. This connection between water and the otherworld is present in many Celtic myths. The river, for example, was often seen as a boundary to be crossed to reach the land of the dead. The crossing of a river in these stories was symbolic of the journey into the otherworld, where spirits and gods moved freely. The sea was the grandest of these liminal spaces, vast and infinite, a metaphor for the unknowable future, where one could either lose themselves or discover something entirely new. The Selkie, then, is not just a creature of two worlds, she is a creature of passage. Her transformation is symbolic of the journey many souls make between life and death, between the known world and the realms beyond. Just as the sea is a place of transition, where the physical world meets the mystical, the Selkie represents the fluidity of life and death, of human and spirit. The sea, in her tale, is not just a backdrop for love and loss, it is the very place where transformation happens, where boundaries dissolve, and where the soul is freed to move between worlds. For the Celts, this fluidity was not something to fear. Water was not just a force of destruction, it was a force of creation. The sea was the birthplace of many gods and creatures, and in the depths of its waters, the mysteries of the universe were held. The Selkie, as a being who could slip between the human world and the otherworld, became a powerful symbol of this connection. Her ability to move between these realms reflected the Celts' understanding of the interconnectedness of all things. The sea was not an enemy or a boundary, it was a conduit, a place of fluidity and transformation where the old world and the new could meet and mingle. In this sense, the Selkie's connection to water is more than just a physical transformation, it is a spiritual journey. It speaks to the belief that water, especially the sea, holds the keys to understanding the mysteries of existence, the truths that lie beyond the grasp of ordinary life. The sea is the boundary between what is known and what is unknown, the place where the living and the dead can meet, and the place where one's true nature can be revealed. For the Celts, the sea was a place of worship, a place of reverence. It was through the water that they believed they could communicate with the divine, with the ancestors, and with the unseen forces that shaped their world. The sea, like the Selkie herself, was a place of mystery and magic, a portal that connected them to the greater mysteries of existence. Through the waters, the Celts believed they could access the knowledge of the gods, the wisdom of the dead, and the power to transform their own lives. The Selkie's connection to the sea is not just about transformation, it is about connection to the divine, to the mysteries that lie beyond human comprehension. Through her, the Celts understood the sea not just as a physical force, but as a bridge, a portal between worlds, a place where the boundaries of life and death, human and divine, love and loss, all become blurred. The sea, in the stories of the Selkie, becomes the sacred space where all things come together, where the infinite and the fleeting are intertwined, and where the soul can truly be free. The moonlight flickered on the surface of the ocean, casting an eerie glow over the shoreline. In the distance, a figure emerged from the water, a woman with dark, wet hair clinging to her skin, her eyes wide with a haunting sadness. She was both human and something else, something ancient, something tied to the wild, unyielding sea. The Selkie, a creature of myth, had found its way into the stories of the modern world, from the pages of books to the frames of films, its image becoming a symbol of longing, loss, and transformation. In the world of art and pop culture, the Selkie has evolved beyond the confines of Celtic folklore. Once a mysterious and tragic figure bound to the tides, the Selkie is now a beloved character that appears in countless works of fiction, music, and film. Her dual nature, part human, part seal, has captured the imagination of creators across generations, and her stories, woven with themes of love, separation, and the sea, continue to resonate with audiences today. One of the most powerful ways the Selkie has been depicted in popular culture is through music. In many folk traditions, the sea has always been a subject of deep emotion, and the Selkie is no different. Songs and ballads have been written about her plight, often emphasizing her sorrow as she is torn between her love for a human and her call to return to the sea. These songs, often haunting in their melodies, express the eternal struggle of the Selkie, her yearning to be free, to return to the ocean, but also her deep love for the human world she has come to inhabit. The melancholy notes of these folk songs echo the timeless nature of the Selkie myth, as her story of love and loss transcends time and place. In literature, the Selkie is often used as a symbol of the fragility of human connection. Authors draw upon the myth to explore themes of identity, transformation, and the inherent tension between freedom and love. In some stories, the Selkie is portrayed as a tragic figure caught between two worlds, one that promises comfort and companionship, and one that calls her back to her true, wild nature. The struggle to reconcile these two sides of her being is central to her narrative in books, and many stories emphasize the impossibility of her ever fully belonging to either world. This duality of existence, between the land and the sea, between human and animal, has been explored in works ranging from modern fantasy novels to classical literature. Films have also given the Selkie a new life, often blending the myth with the aesthetics of cinema to create a visual and emotional experience that is both haunting and beautiful. In many films, the Selkie is depicted as a mysterious, almost ethereal figure, appearing as a woman who steps out of the water or a seal who is transformed into a human. The visual imagery of a creature who exists between two worlds is powerful in film, where the sea becomes not just a setting, but a symbol of the wild, untamable forces that govern the Selkie's life. Whether the story is set in the far-shrouded coasts of Scotland or the vast, open seas, the Selkie's transformation is often depicted as both magical and tragic, capturing the essence of what it means to long for something beyond the reach of human existence. One of the most iconic Selkie representations in modern media comes from the 2000 film The Secret of Roan Inish, which brings the myth to life on the big screen. In this movie, a young girl uncovers the story of her family's connection to the Selkies, and the film delicately explores themes of family, heritage, and the call of the sea. The film's portrayal of the Selkie is both enchanting and sorrowful, capturing the heart of the myth while adding layers of emotion and history that resonate with viewers. The story's magical realism mirrors the mystical elements of the Selkie legend while grounding it in the very real struggles of belonging and identity. In recent years, the Selkie has also appeared in contemporary fantasy novels, particularly those that blur the line between myth and modern-day life. Authors have reimagined the Selkie as a creature caught between the modern world and the ancient one, her longing for the sea juxtaposed with the human world's pressures and expectations. These newer depictions tend to place the Selkie in settings far removed from the traditional Celtic landscapes, urban environments, small towns by the sea, or even magical realms where she must confront modern problems while still battling the ancient pull of the ocean. Her presence in contemporary literature speaks to an ongoing fascination with the themes of transformation, identity, and the search for belonging. The image of the Selkie has also permeated visual arts, where artists have drawn upon the myth to create breathtaking works that celebrate the fluidity of the Selkie's form. Paintings, illustrations, and sculptures often depict the Selkie as a mystical being whose transformation is captured in a single moment of time. The beauty of these works lies in the way they express both the human and animal aspects of the Selkie, her wild, untamable nature, and her tender, vulnerable humanity. These artworks speak to the inner conflict of the Selkie and the freedom she longs for, creating a visual representation of the myth that speaks directly to the viewer's emotions. Even in contemporary pop culture, the Selkie's image has endured, and she continues to be a symbol of deep, complex emotions. From television series that reference her myth in passing, to online communities where her stories are reimagined and retold, the Selkie remains a figure of fascination for the modern world. The myth of the Selkie, with its themes of transformation, love, and separation, continues to resonate because it reflects the timeless human struggle to reconcile the parts of ourselves that long for freedom with the parts that seek connection, love, and understanding. In all these depictions, whether in music, literature, film, or visual arts, the Selkie remains a symbol of longing, transformation, and the eternal call of the sea. Her story is one of love, loss, and identity, capturing the emotional complexities of being caught between two worlds. And as the Selkie continues to emerge in modern art and pop culture, her myth endures, timeless and evocative, reminding us of the delicate balance between human desires and the call of the wild. A shadow passed over the moonlit road, and the stillness of the night was broken by the clatter of hooves. From the darkness, a rider appeared, silent, yet somehow menacing. His horse moved with unnatural grace, its eyes glowing faintly, while the rider remained still, a headless figure atop the steed. In his hand, he carried his severed head, which hung by its own long hair, eyes wide open and staring into nothing. This was no ordinary ghostly figure. The Dullahan, a creature of nightmare, was born of death and darkness, a harbinger of doom whose mere presence struck terror into the hearts of those who knew his name. In Celtic mythology, the Dullahan is not simply a ghost, it is an executioner, a vengeful spirit that moves through the night, seeking the souls of the living to take them to the afterlife. He is a figure of death itself, relentless and unstoppable, and his sight alone is enough to seal the fate of his victims. It is said that when the Dullahan is near, no one can escape. His eerie, hollow voice, often calling out the name of his next victim, sends chills through the bones of anyone who hears it. If you hear your name called by the Dullahan, it's already too late. Your time has come. The most terrifying aspect of the Dullahan is not just his appearance, though it is certainly enough to haunt any living soul. His head, detached from his body, is not lifeless. In fact, it is often described as having glowing eyes and a mouth that opens in a twisted grin, constantly moving as though it is alive. The severed head serves as a symbol of his power, a grim reminder that death is not bound by the rules of life. It is said that the head is filled with knowledge, knowing the names and fates of all those who walk the earth, and it is through this head that the Dullahan's power is unleashed. The Dullahan's horse, a creature as terrifying as its rider, is often described as being as dark as the night itself, its eyes burning with an unearthly light. The horse is no ordinary steed, but one that is just as bound to the spirit of death as the rider. Together, they are an unstoppable force, galloping through the countryside, bringing fear and death wherever they go. The sound of their hooves is said to echo through the night, but no one can ever see them until it is too late. By the time they appear, it is already a sign that someone will die. Some tales say that the Dullahan can pass through locked doors and gates without a single hindrance, his powers over life and death making him immune to earthly constraints. Others claim that he carries a whip made from a human spine, a tool he uses to lash at the living, sending them to their final rest. The whip is as much a part of his terrifying presence as the horse and head. With each lash, it seals the fate of those he strikes, and there is no escaping the Dullahan's reach once you're in his sights. The Dullahan's fearsome nature has made him a symbol of death and fate in Celtic folklore, a figure that transcends the borders between life and the afterlife. He is not just a spirit of vengeance, but also a messenger of fate, carrying with him the certainty that death will come for all. For the Celts, death was not something to be feared, but something to be respected, and the Dullahan was a figure who represented that respect. He was not a malicious force, but a necessary one, a force of nature that ensured the balance of life and death was maintained. In the tales of the Dullahan, death is not just a natural part of life, but something that must be acknowledged, something that must be faced. The Dullahan serves as a reminder that death is ever present, just waiting for the right moment to come for each of us. His appearance is not meant to inspire fear, but awe, a deep reverence for the inevitability of death and the mysteries that lie beyond it. For those who saw the Dullahan, it was often said that they were never the same again. The encounter left them with a profound understanding that death, though feared, was an unavoidable part of the human experience. And then there is the chilling tradition that when the Dullahan comes to claim a soul, he does not ride alone. It is said that his presence is accompanied by an eerie silence, a sudden quietness that falls over the land. Birds fall silent, and the wind ceases to blow, as if the world itself holds its breath in fear of the Dullahan's arrival. This unnerving stillness only adds to the dread that accompanies his approach, making the rider's appearance feel even more unnatural. Though much of the Dullahan's terrifying myth has been passed down in oral tradition and adapted into modern stories, his legacy remains one of death, inevitability, and respect for the unknown. He is no simple ghost, no wandering spirit. He is a force, a figure who embodies the relentless march of time, the constant presence of death, and the reality that no one can escape their fate. And in the dead of night, when the moon rises high and the air grows still, one can almost hear the clatter of hooves echoing in the distance. The Dullahan is out there, somewhere, searching for those whose time has come. The terrifying image of the headless rider, his glowing eyes fixed on the road ahead, is a reminder that death is never too far away. The Dullahan moves swiftly, unstoppable, and once he has come for you, there is no turning back. The air was thick with an unnatural stillness, as though the earth itself held its breath. A lone figure, a man without a head, rode atop a black horse, his glowing eyes piercing the darkness. The sound of his horse's hooves echoed like the distant beating of a drum, signaling the inevitable approach of death. The Dullahan had arrived, and with him, the weight of fate. Fate. In the presence of the Dullahan, it was not a distant, abstract concept, but something tangible and terrifying. It was as if the rider's very existence was a manifestation of fate itself, a relentless force that could neither be ignored nor avoided. His arrival was the moment when the unknown reached out and touched the living, pulling them into its fold, confirming that their time had come. The Dullahan's role in Celtic folklore was inseparable from the idea of fate. He wasn't just a harbinger of death, he was a symbol of the inevitable. Fate, in the Celtic worldview, was something that could not be altered. It was woven into the fabric of existence, and even the gods themselves were subject to it. The Dullahan, in his headless form and his unyielding pursuit of souls, represented this unbreakable thread. He was the enforcer of fate, reminding all who heard the echo of his hooves that life, no matter how fleeting or fragile, always had an end. The Dullahan's head, which he carried in his hand, was no mere accessory, it was a vessel of power. It was filled with the knowledge of fates, the names of those who were destined to die. His head, constantly grinning as if mocking the living, had the ability to see into the very heart of time. No one could escape their fate once they had been marked by the Dullahan. His head, an ever-watchful witness to the flow of life and death, allowed him to know when the hour had come for someone to pass. It was not out of malice or cruelty, but simply the fulfillment of what was written in the stars. In the myths, the Dullahan would appear without warning, his arrival signaled by a chilling silence that enveloped the land. The very moment his name was called, the living knew, there was no escape. He carried the names of the doomed, and when he called them, it was not just a death sentence. It was the acknowledgement of fate's cruel grip, a reminder that every person's journey would eventually come to an end, whether they were ready or not. The Dullahan was the embodiment of that inescapable truth. No amount of pleading or running could change the course of fate once he was on the trail. For those who dared to speak of the Dullahan, there was an undeniable reverence, even fear, attached to his name. He was not a being to be trifled with or mocked. In his wake, the idea of fate was no longer a mere philosophical musing, it became raw, terrifying, and personal. To see the Dullahan was to see your own mortality, your own fate, staring you in the face. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the Dullahan's association with fate was that he was an impartial force. He did not choose who would die, he was simply the executor of a greater, cosmic design. Those who perished at his hands were not singled out for punishment or reward. They were simply those whose time had come, and the Dullahan, with his unyielding presence, made sure that fate played out as it was meant to. The idea that death could be so blind, so impersonal, was a terrifying realization for those who understood the Dullahan's role. The notion that each person, regardless of their deeds, would eventually meet the same fate was a truth that no one could escape. The Dullahan's connection to fate was not just a reflection of the inevitability of death, but also of the inescapable forces that governed the lives of the living. In Celtic belief, the gods themselves were not exempt from fate's reach. The Dullahan was a manifestation of this same law. He represented the forces beyond the control of humans, the powers that dictated life and death with an indifference that was both chilling and awe-inspiring. The sight of the Dullahan riding through the darkened night was not just a sign of death, it was a reminder of the role that fate played in the Celtic worldview. The Dullahan did not simply take lives, he embodied the very concept of fate, moving like a shadow across the land, unstoppable and unmoved by any plea or prayer. Once the Dullahan had chosen his path, nothing could alter the course of destiny. The very sight of him invoked a surrender to fate, a realization that life, and all its beauty and suffering, had an end, and that end was predetermined. As the rider galloped through the night, with his glowing eyes and head held high, the dread he instilled was not just for those who had yet to meet him, but for everyone who had ever wondered about their own place in the web of life and death. The Dullahan did not answer those questions, he only served as a reminder that some things, like fate, were not meant to be questioned or altered. They simply were. The Dullahan's connection to fate echoes through time, leaving an indelible mark on those who remember his name. He is a figure of inevitability, of forces beyond the control of mere mortals, and as long as the myths endure, so too will the reminder that fate is never far behind. In the quiet of the night, a figure without a head roams the darkness, carrying the weight of death in his hands. His name is the Dullahan, and he is a harbinger of fate, a force that no one can escape. Yet, across the world, other cultures have their own myths of headless riders, death-bringers, and figures who carry with them the certainty of mortality. These myths share an eerie resonance, suggesting a universal fear of death, fate, and the unknown that transcends borders and time. The Dullahan's counterpart in Norse mythology is the Einherjar, the fallen warriors chosen to fight in the halls of Valhalla, who ride out in the company of the Valkyries to face the end. Though they are not headless, the idea of death being personified and warriors bound to it shares similarities with the Celtic myth. The Einherjar, though valiant, are subject to fate, and their final battle at Ragnarok echoes the Dullahan's unrelenting march towards a predetermined end. Both figures are inexorable, bound by fate and death, their very existence a reminder of life's fleeting nature. Across the ocean in South America, the La Llorona myth of Mexico presents another figure of death and mourning, though in a different form. La Llorona, the weeping woman who searches for her lost children, is a spirit tied to the riverbanks, her cry echoing through the night. While she doesn't take the form of a headless rider, her mournful wailing invokes the same sense of inevitable tragedy that follows the Dullahan. La Llorona, like the Dullahan, is a figure who cannot be ignored, embodying loss and the sorrow of the living. Her legend, much like the Dullahan's, carries with it a chilling warning: the presence of death can never be escaped, only faced. The myth of the Headless Horseman from the United States, particularly in Washington Irving's The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, brings yet another variant to the image of the headless rider. This tale, with its ghostly figure riding through the night, is undeniably similar to the Dullahan in its theme. The horseman, like the Dullahan, is bound to the dark forces of the night and carries with him a head that is missing, an outward symbol of death's presence. But unlike the Dullahan, the headless horseman's motives are often attributed to vengeance, and his role is less about fate and more about retribution. Even so, the similarities are hard to deny. Both riders appear out of the darkness, bringing terror and an understanding that death follows close behind. In Japan, the myth of the Yurei, spirits of the dead, often takes on the form of a woman dressed in white with long, disheveled hair, sometimes without a head, searching for those who wronged them in life. This figure, much like the Dullahan, is a manifestation of death that cannot be avoided. The Yurei is a restless soul, much like the Dullahan, a reminder that the dead are never truly gone and that the reckoning of fate will come to those who deserve it. In some ways, the Yurei is more focused on vengeance, but the core idea of a figure haunting the living, bringing with them the inevitability of death, is shared across both myths. In the Caribbean, the Jumbi spirits are often seen as mischievous or malevolent entities, but their role in Caribbean folklore also ties to the inescapability of death. The Jumbi are sometimes portrayed as headless, wandering spirits whose haunting presence can be felt throughout the night. Their role in death is often ambiguous, but they, like the Dullahan, are reminders that death has no mercy, no consideration for the living. The headlessness of these figures in Caribbean folklore ties them back to the same symbolism seen in the Dullahan myth. Death is a force that cannot be reasoned with, a force that is both mysterious and terrifying. Across cultures, the presence of headless spirits, riders, or figures of death is strikingly similar. While the particulars may differ, the Jumbi may be playful, La Llorona is full of sorrow, and the Einarjar fight with honor. What unites them is the role they play in communicating a singular truth. Death is inevitable, and no one can escape it. These figures, whether headless or not, are symbols of fate itself. They remind us that our time, like all things, is finite. The Dullahan, much like his counterparts across the world, is an embodiment of this immutable truth, a truth that cuts across cultures, eras, and belief systems. In each of these myths, the headless figure or deathbringer is not a villain in the traditional sense. Instead, they are agents of fate, forces that transcend the mortal realm and serve to remind the living that their time is not their own. The Dullahan is merely one iteration of this universal myth, the idea that death is always lurking, waiting for the right moment to take us all. Whether through the grinning head of the Dullahan, the mournful wail of La Llorona, or the silent presence of the Uriai, these figures all share a deep connection to the inevitability of the end. As the Dullahan rides through the night, head in hand, his hooves echoing in the silence, it becomes clear, he is not just a creature of Celtic myth. He is part of a much larger tapestry of deathbringers across the world. And no matter where we are, the truth remains the same. Death, fate, and the mystery of what lies beyond are universal. And the Dullahan, like all these figures, serves as a reminder that no matter how far we run, we cannot escape our fate. Beneath the still surface of a dark, Scottish loch, something stirs, an unsettling ripple disturbs the water. The breeze whispers a secret to the trees, a warning perhaps, but it's already too late. The Kelpie is near. Its sleek, powerful form breaks through the water's edge, its hooves pounding the earth with an eerie rhythm. But it is no ordinary horse. It is a creature born of the water, a shape-shifting monster that has the ability to transform, to deceive, and to claim the souls of those foolish enough to get too close. The Kelpie, a legendary water spirit of Scottish folklore, is a figure that has haunted lochs and rivers for centuries. At first glance, it may appear to be an ordinary horse, beautiful, wild, and free, but closer inspection reveals its true nature. With its gleaming, coal-black coat and flowing mane, the Kelpie exudes an otherworldly allure. Its beauty masks its terrifying purpose, a predator with the power to lure unsuspecting victims to their doom. Kelpies are shapeshifters, able to transform into different forms to deceive and trap their prey. While the horse is the most common form, the Kelpie is not limited to this. It can take on the appearance of a young woman or even a human man, its features sometimes eerily perfect, other times slightly off, a subtle clue that something is amiss. But the moment someone falls for its charm and approaches the Kelpie, whether in horse form or human guise, there is no escape. The Kelpie's true nature is revealed only when it reveals its power, pulling its victim into the deep waters where it resides. Its strength is unimaginable, its hooves able to smash through rock and ice with a single strike. And once someone has been caught in its grasp, there is no hope. Those who are dragged into the water never return, their bodies claimed by the Kelpie's unyielding hunger. The creature's primary goal is to drown, to consume, and to feed on the souls of the living. Its nature is intrinsically tied to the water it inhabits, and it is said that it can only be killed by wounding it in a way that leaves it incapable of returning to the loch. The connection between the Kelpie and water is fundamental. The Kelpie is not simply a creature of the water, it is the embodiment of the dangers that lie within it. Lochs, rivers, and the sea have always been places of mystery and fear, their depths hiding secrets that no mortal should disturb. The Kelpie, with its cruel and clever ways, embodies the fear of the unknown, the terror of what lurks beneath the surface. For centuries, people have feared the waters, knowing that they are never truly safe. The Kelpie is the reminder of that ancient fear, a creature whose very existence challenges the belief that the world can be understood, controlled, or tamed. But there is something even more sinister to the Kelpie's nature than its shape-shifting abilities and deceptive appearance. The Kelpie is driven by a deep, insatiable hunger for souls. It is said that it does not merely kill its victims for sustenance, but to claim them, to steal their life force. It is a creature of darkness, both metaphorically and literally, thriving in the blackness of the loch and the shadows of human ignorance. There are tales of those who, after being captured, are pulled into the depths and held there for eternity, their spirits consumed and their souls trapped forever. It is no surprise that the Kelpie's mythology has made its mark on the consciousness of Scotland and beyond. The creature is not just a monster in the traditional sense, it is a symbol of danger, of things that are hidden, of forces that cannot be understood or controlled. The Kelpie serves as a warning, a reminder of the power of nature and the mysteries of the water. It teaches that there is always something lurking beneath the surface, something that cannot be seen, something that is waiting for the right moment to strike. In some tales, there are hints of a darker side to the Kelpie's nature. It is said that if someone manages to tame a Kelpie, it can be used as a powerful steed, its immense strength and speed making it an unparalleled companion. But even in these stories, there is an undercurrent of danger. The Kelpie is not easily tamed. It is a wild creature, and the moment it is dishonored or mistreated, it will turn on its rider. The Kelpie is a reminder that no matter how powerful or majestic a force may appear, it remains wild and untamable at its core. It cannot be conquered by human will or desire. But beyond its ferocity and treachery, the Kelpie is also a deeply tragic figure. It is not simply an evil creature, but one bound to a realm from which it can never escape. The Kelpie's existence is tied to the water. It is a creature of the deep, forever tied to the loch or river where it dwells. It is isolated, its beauty and allure masking the prison it inhabits. In some versions of the tale, the Kelpie is portrayed as a creature cursed to lure and destroy, but there is a subtle hint that it, too, is a prisoner of fate. It is a being forever bound to a place it cannot leave, driven to kill not out of malice, but out of a deeper hunger, a compulsion it cannot resist. The Kelpie is a creature that lives in the space between life and death, a figure that exists in the liminal zone where the known and the unknown collide. It is a reflection of the danger of the natural world, a reminder that some forces are beyond our understanding, and that not all beauty is benign. The waters may seem calm, but beneath the surface, there is always something lurking, waiting for its next victim. And the Kelpie, ever patient, will wait, forever bound to the water, always watching, always hungry. The eerie sound of hooves echoes in the distance, carried by the wind across the quiet loch. The water, which once seemed so inviting, now ripples ominously as a dark shape emerges. A gleaming black horse, its eyes gleaming with something ancient, something predatory, steps out of the water. There's a shiver in the air, as if the world holds its breath, and for a moment, time seems to freeze. Anyone who dares to approach the horse, believing it to be an innocent creature, would never return. The Kelpie, with its beauty and power, serves as one of the most chilling cautionary tales in Celtic mythology. On the surface, it appears to be an ordinary horse, wild and free, its coat as black as midnight and its mane flowing like the current of a river. But as with all things in folklore, appearances deceive. The Kelpie is a creature of the water, capable of shapeshifting and luring the unsuspecting into its deadly grasp. It is not just a monster, it is a lesson, one that has been passed down through generations, warning against hubris, the dangers of the natural world, and the consequences of ignoring ancient wisdom. In the stories of the Kelpie, the waters become a boundary between the known and the unknown. Rivers and lochs are not just physical bodies of water in these tales, they are symbolic representations of the mysteries that lie beyond human understanding. The Kelpie, in its various forms, embodies the darker side of nature, the parts that cannot be controlled, the forces that are beyond human comprehension. People may be drawn to the beauty of the water, to its promise of tranquility, but the Kelpie reveals that nature's true power is far more dangerous. It is a warning not to underestimate the forces that dwell beyond human control. The Kelpie's role as a cautionary tale can be understood through the lens of human vulnerability. In folklore, many of the victims of the Kelpie are travelers, wanderers who venture too close to the water's edge, believing that they are safe. In some stories, the Kelpie lures them in with its deceptively serene appearance, whether as a beautiful horse or a vulnerable woman, using charm and allure to draw them in. It is in these moments of vulnerability, when someone lets down their guard, that the Kelpie strikes. This reflects a deep fear in human nature, the fear of the unknown, of trusting something or someone that appears harmless. And yet, beneath the surface, there is always danger waiting, ready to consume. The Kelpie's deceptive beauty is a direct reflection of this fear. The creature is not just a malevolent force, it is a reflection of the way people often ignore warnings, seeking things that seem too good to be true. It speaks to the human tendency to desire something without understanding the true cost. The stories of the Kelpie warn of the consequences of ignoring nature's power and the dangers of trusting things that look too perfect, too inviting. In a sense, the Kelpie is the embodiment of false allure, of the temptation to seek something without fully understanding the potential consequences. In Celtic culture, the Kelpie also acts as a cautionary tale for the young, especially children. In these myths, the Kelpie is often portrayed as a creature that preys upon the young and vulnerable. The story serves as a lesson to children: be careful of strangers, especially those who appear too good to be true. In this way, the Kelpie myth resonates with universal themes of trust and danger, teaching lessons about discernment and awareness. But it's not just children who are at risk. The Kelpie's lure knows no age or gender. It serves as a reminder that no one is invincible, and that danger can strike when we least expect it. The Kelpie also represents a deeper fear, the fear of losing control. In many of the stories, the victim is helpless once they've been caught. There's no fighting back against the Kelpie's strength, no escape from its grasp. The creature's power is absolute, and once it claims its victim, they are lost forever. This loss of control mirrors the way that humans often feel powerless in the face of nature's might. The Kelpie teaches us that the forces of nature, much like the creatures who dwell in them, cannot be tamed. The stories remind us that no matter how much we think we can control the world around us, there are always forces beyond our understanding. The Kelpie's role as a cautionary tale is also bound to its status as a creature of the water. Water is a symbol of both life and death in Celtic culture, a life-giving force that sustains, but one that can also drown and destroy. The Kelpie, emerging from the water, reminds us of the duality of nature. Water is a source of nourishment, but it is also unpredictable and dangerous. By tempting its victims into the depths, the Kelpie reflects the fine line between what is life-sustaining and what is life-ending. It teaches the balance of respecting the power of nature rather than trying to conquer it. As centuries pass, the Kelpie's cautionary lessons persist, and its presence continues to loom over the shores of Scottish lochs. The myth serves as an enduring reminder that beauty can be a mask for something far darker, that there is danger lurking just beneath the surface, waiting to claim the unwary. The Kelpie is not just a creature of death, it is a creature of consequence. In its watery depths, the stories of the past echo through time, urging each new generation to be vigilant, to respect the power of nature, and to never underestimate the dangers that might lie hidden in the places we least expect. The transformation of a creature from one form to another is often as old as the story itself. And no being embodies this shape-shifting nature more than the Kelpie, whose ability to morph between human and horse, or even other forms, speaks to a larger world of mythological creatures that share its fluidity. At its core, the Kelpie is a creature of paradox, beautiful yet deadly, fluid yet unyielding. The tales of this shape-shifting monster reveal an intricate web of connections between various mythological creatures, whose roles in folklore often blur the lines between different forms, embodying nature's power to shift and change. The connection between the Kelpie and its shape-shifting nature is not a trait exclusive to this Scottish monster alone. Across Celtic folklore, there are similar figures, spirits and beasts that can switch forms at will, revealing the flexibility and mystique inherent in the natural world. The Kelpie's most notable kin are the shape-shifting Selkies, whose transformations also carry significant meaning. Like the Kelpie, Selkies can assume both human and animal forms, but rather than being malicious, they are typically portrayed as tragic figures caught between two worlds. The parallels are clear. Both creatures, despite their differing temperaments, exist in a state of liminality, inhabiting two distinct forms with a fluidity that is emblematic of Celtic lore. Beyond the Selkies, the Kelpie shares kinship with the Irish Púca, a creature equally capable of changing form at will. The Púca, much like the Kelpie, has a dual nature, known for its ability to appear as a black horse, among other forms, in order to play tricks or carry people to dangerous places. In some tales, it is said to be a mischievous yet not entirely malevolent spirit. In others, it takes on a darker side, creating chaos and leading travelers astray. The Púca is another prime example of a shapeshifter, existing at the intersection of good and evil, a figure both feared and revered, much like the Kelpie, which can be both terrifying and tragic depending on the perspective. These shapeshifting creatures are tied to a broader theme of transformation in Celtic mythology. In many cultures, the ability to transform into different forms symbolizes both power and the possibility of deception. For the Kelpie, this fluidity between the horse and human forms reinforces the creature's dual nature. One moment, a magnificent and noble beast, the next, a dangerous monster luring its prey into the water. Similarly, the Púca, by shifting from a horse to a man, carries with it a sense of unpredictability. Both creatures embody the tension between human understanding and the forces of nature, revealing that the natural world itself is not a fixed or stable entity but one filled with change, mystery, and danger. The concept of transformation also connects the Kelpie to other mythological creatures from across different cultures. In Greek mythology, the god Produce is famous for his ability to change shape. While Produce is a god associated with the sea, much like the Kelpie, the similarity between the two beings lies in their shared association with the fluid and ever-changing nature of water. Produce's transformations are often a reflection of the unknowable power of the sea, much in the same way that the Kelpie's transformations mirror the danger and mystery of lochs and rivers. Water, in both mythologies, is portrayed as something beyond human understanding, shifting, unpredictable, and capable of masking dangerous creatures like the Kelpie. Another connection can be drawn between the Kelpie and the mythical Norse creature, the Knock, a shape-shifting water spirit that also lures people to their doom. Like the Kelpie, the Knock's form often takes the shape of a horse, and it has a similar penchant for deceiving those who wander too close to the water. The Knock is a reminder of the ancient belief that water is a space of both life and death, and like the Kelpie, it is a creature that takes advantage of human vulnerability, using its beauty to lure its victims. While the Knock may be less well known than the Kelpie, it exists in parallel with the Scottish myth, offering a glimpse into a shared cultural reverence for water spirits across Northern Europe. Beyond the specific forms of the Kelpie, its shape-shifting nature also ties into a larger theme in Celtic mythology, the belief that many creatures, especially those tied to the natural world, exist on the edge of two worlds. This is a notion that echoes through many tales, from the Púca's trickery to the stories of the Fae. The Kelpie is, at its heart, a creature that embodies both the known and the unknown, the surface of the water, with its glistening beauty, and the depths beneath, filled with danger and darkness. Its transformations are a manifestation of this duality, a reminder that what is seen is not always what is real, and that the truth is often buried beneath layers of illusion. This connection between shape-shifting creatures across Celtic mythology also highlights a deeper cultural understanding of the world. Nature, to the Celts, was not something that could be easily categorized or controlled. It was alive, fluid, and full of hidden depths. Creatures like the Kelpie were a way of understanding the world's complexities, of acknowledging that the world was filled with forces beyond human comprehension, forces that could shift and change, much like the creatures that inhabited it. As with many creatures in Celtic mythology, the Kelpie's transformation is not merely about shape-shifting for the sake of deception. It is a reminder of the mysterious forces that govern the world, the hidden currents that run beneath the surface of everyday life. Whether the creature is in its horse form, luring travelers to their deaths, or in its human form, manipulating emotions and desires, the Kelpie represents the dangerous allure of the unknown. It is a symbol of transformation not just in physical form, but in the way it challenges our perceptions of reality, showing us that things are never as simple as they seem, and that behind every beauty, there may lie a darker truth. The air is thick with tension as a shadow passes over the battlefield. The warriors, locked in a brutal clash, hardly notice the dark figure circling high above them. Her wings spread wide, a raven's wings, her sharp eyes watching with a cold, calculating gaze. The Morrigan, an ancient and fearsome goddess, waits. She is not there to intervene, but to observe the cycle of life and death unfolding below. Her presence is felt, though unseen, in the flutter of wings and the cries of her ravens, the creatures she commands, who seem to bear witness to the fates of all who fight. The Morrigan's connection to ravens is more than just a passing link between goddess and bird. It is woven into the very fabric of Celtic mythology, a thread that ties her to the realms of war, death, and fate. To the ancient Celts, ravens were not mere creatures of the sky, but messengers and symbols of the divine. The Morrigan, with her fearsome, multifaceted persona, ruled over them, imbuing the birds with her essence, granting them the power to both shape and foretell the lives of warriors. In battle, the Morrigan is often depicted as a goddess of war and death, but her true power lies in her dominion over fate. She is a figure who weaves the tapestry of destiny with a cruel and unwavering hand, and ravens, as her loyal companions, act as her agents in this process. They are her eyes, her messengers, and in some stories, her very instruments of war. It is said that the Morrigan would appear as a raven on the battlefield, watching the carnage unfold, waiting for the inevitable deaths that would follow. Her ravens, too, would swoop down and feast upon the fallen, their dark, glossy feathers a reminder that death was never far behind. Ravens, in Celtic mythology, are often seen as harbingers of doom, their presence a sign that death is near. The Morrigan, as the goddess of fate and war, shares this connection. The birds are not merely scavengers, picking over the corpses of the slain. They are agents of the Morrigan, who chooses who will live and who will die. Her ravens are not just observers, but active participants in the battle between life and death. In many ways, the ravens are extensions of the Morrigan herself, her silent, ever-watchful eyes, observing and judging the fates of those caught in the chaos of war. The connection between the Morrigan and ravens is not limited to the battlefield, however. The birds are also symbols of prophecy and transformation, two aspects that are deeply intertwined with the Morrigan's character. She is a goddess of change, of shifting identities and outcomes, and the raven reflects this transformative nature. In some tales, the Morrigan appears as a shapeshifter, taking on the form of a raven to traverse the mortal world and interact with the lives of those whose fates are yet to be sealed. In this way, the raven becomes a vehicle for her will, carrying her influence across the land, touching the lives of kings and warriors, of mortals and gods alike. The Morrigan's ravens also play a role as a guide for the souls of the dead. In some stories, they are seen as the ones who carry the souls of the fallen to the otherworld, where they will be judged and receive their due. This connection between the Morrigan and the ravens is a reminder that death is not an end, but a transformation, a journey to another realm, where fate is decided. The ravens, as her emissaries, carry this message, reminding the living that death is an inevitable part of life cycle, and that all must eventually face the Morrigan's judgment. The Morrigan's ravens are not only symbols of death and war, but also of knowledge and wisdom. Ravens are often depicted as intelligent creatures, capable of understanding the world in ways that humans cannot. This connection to wisdom is particularly fitting for the Morrigan, who is not just a goddess of destruction, but also one of insight and foresight. Her ravens, with their sharp minds and keen senses, act as her messengers of knowledge, delivering messages to those who can understand their meaning. In this way, the ravens are not simply creatures of the battlefield, but guides to the deeper truths of the world, the truths that only the Morrigan can reveal. But it is not just the raven's intelligence that ties them to the Morrigan, it is their duality. The raven is both a symbol of death and of life, a creature that walks the fine line between the two realms. In Celtic mythology, ravens are seen as creatures that occupy both the physical and the spiritual worlds. They are capable of bridging the gap between life and death, between the mortal and the divine. This dual nature mirrors the Morrigan herself, a goddess who embodies both creation and destruction, both life and death. Just as the raven can shift between realms, so too does the Morrigan move between worlds, her presence felt both in the mortal realm and in the otherworld. The connection between the Morrigan and ravens also speaks to the darker side of human nature. The ravens are not simply messengers of fate, but also of destruction. They are often seen as omens, their cries signaling impending doom. In this way, the Morrigan and her ravens are tied to the darker aspects of existence, the inevitability of death, the unpredictability of fate, and the sometimes cruel hand of destiny. The Morrigan does not offer mercy, nor does she offer hope. She is a force of nature, impartial and unyielding. Her ravens, with their cold eyes and silent flight, embody this same indifference to human suffering. Yet, despite their association with death, the ravens are also creatures of beauty and mystery. Their glossy black feathers shimmer in the sunlight, their eyes gleaming with intelligence. They are symbols of the Morrigan's power and grace, her ability to move through the world unnoticed, yet always present. The ravens, with their silent wings and sharp beaks, are both harbingers of death and symbols of the Morrigan's eternal presence, a presence that will never fade, no matter how many years pass, no matter how many battles are fought. In the end, the Morrigan and her ravens are inseparable. They are one and the same, the goddess and her creatures, intertwined in a relationship that transcends the boundaries of life and death. Through the ravens, the Morrigan's power is both seen and unseen, felt in the quiet moments before battle, in the shifting winds, and in the cries that echo over the battlefield. Her ravens are her eyes and her voice, bearing witness to the fates of all who walk the earth, a reminder that nothing escapes her gaze, and that all will one day face her judgment. The raven soars above the landscape, its wings slicing through the air with a fluid, eerie grace. Below, the world is in chaos, battlefields, stormy seas, the unyielding wilderness. Its call echoes in the wind, a sound that sends a shiver down the spine. In Celtic mythology, this bird is not just a creature of nature but a symbol of far deeper forces, of life, death, fate, and the ever-present influence of the gods. The raven is a figure that transcends the ordinary, embodying the complex and mysterious nature of Celtic belief, a creature both feared and revered, with meanings that stretch across the realms of the known and the unknown. For the Celts, ravens were not just birds, they were messengers from the otherworld, emissaries of gods, and symbols of powerful, unseen forces. In Celtic culture, the raven's black feathers and piercing, intelligent gaze made it a creature that existed at the threshold of life and death, capable of crossing into realms beyond the mortal world. Its association with battlefields was not merely due to its scavenging nature, but because it was seen as an active participant in the fate of warriors. The sight of ravens perched on the edge of a battlefield, circling overhead, was a sign that death was near, that the fates of the combatants had already been sealed. Ravens were especially tied to war and death, and nowhere is this connection more evident than in the mythology surrounding the Morrigan, the Celtic goddess of war, fate, and sovereignty. The Morrigan is often depicted with a raven or even as a raven herself, symbolizing her role in the cycle of life and death. She is not just a goddess of battle but of destiny, and the ravens, as her loyal companions, are the eyes of fate, watching over the fallen, bearing witness to the judgment that follows death. They are not mere scavengers, but creatures that actively participate in the weavings of destiny, and in some versions of the myth, they are believed to foretell the death of those they circle. In this way, ravens represent the unchangeable and inescapable nature of fate, a constant reminder that death is inevitable, no matter how hard one may try to avoid it. But the raven's symbolism goes far beyond death. In Celtic mythology, the raven also represents knowledge, wisdom, and prophecy. These birds are often associated with the divine, acting as messengers between gods and mortals. Their dark feathers, their sharp eyes, their ability to fly through the air with ease, these qualities gave ravens an air of mystery and power. The raven's ability to see the world from a height, to observe both near and far, made it a fitting symbol of far-reaching wisdom, capable of seeing what others could not. The raven was thought to possess an intelligence beyond that of other creatures, capable of understanding the language of the gods and carrying their messages to those who were willing to listen. In the myths, the raven often serves as a guide or a prophet, leading heroes and gods alike to wisdom and understanding. It is a bird that can cross the boundaries between the physical world and the spiritual realm, acting as a mediator between the mortal and divine. This connection between the raven and prophecy is perhaps most famously embodied in the figure of the Welsh goddess Rhiannon, who is often associated with birds, including ravens. In some tales, Rhiannon's birds are said to have the power to summon the dead and to grant wisdom to those who seek it. In this way, ravens are not just symbols of death, but also of insight and the knowledge that lies beyond the mortal world. Ravens also hold a significant place in the mythologies of the Norse, where they are seen as the companions of Odin, the chief god. Odin's ravens, Hugin and Munin, whose names mean thought and memory, serve as his spies, bringing him knowledge from the farthest corners of the world. The raven's role in Odin's service reinforces their connection to knowledge and wisdom, but also their dual nature as both servants of the divine and as creatures that bear witness to the unfolding of fate. Their ability to travel freely between the worlds of the gods and the mortal realm highlights their unique position as creatures that exist at the crossroads of different realities, much like the ravens in Celtic mythology, who bridge the gap between the living and the dead. Beyond their associations with the gods, ravens were also seen as protectors and guardians. The Celts believed that the raven had the power to protect warriors in battle, to ensure that they would be victorious, or, if their fate was sealed, to guide their souls to the otherworld. Ravens were seen as a safeguard, an intermediary that would help guide the dead to their rightful place, whether that was in the afterlife or within the cycle of reincarnation. The bird's presence was a reminder that death was not an end but a transition, and that those who had died would be watched over and cared for in the afterlife. Yet, despite all these positive associations, the raven's symbolism is not without its darker side. In the same way that it is associated with wisdom and prophecy, it is also linked to deception and trickery. The raven's dark feathers and cold, calculating gaze evoke a sense of danger, a reminder that knowledge comes with a price. In some stories, the raven is portrayed as a creature that manipulates fate, guiding people into danger or tempting them with knowledge they are not prepared to receive. The raven's role as a messenger is not always one of good fortune, and its presence is often seen as a sign that a choice must be made, a choice that could lead to either salvation or destruction. The raven's dual nature is reflected in the way it appears in many of the Celtic myths. It is a creature that can bring both death and wisdom, both destruction and protection. This duality is perhaps most clearly embodied in the Morrigan, who, as both a goddess of war and fate, embodies the raven's power to create and destroy. Her connection to the ravens is one of deep interdependence. Together, they represent the complexity of existence, where life and death are inextricably linked, and where the choices we make can lead to either salvation or ruin. For the Celts, the raven was not just a bird, but a symbol of the complex and ever-changing nature of life itself. It was a reminder that life and death, wisdom and deception, fate and free will, are all part of the same cycle, a cycle that can never be fully understood, but must be respected. The raven's black feathers and piercing eyes are a testament to the mystery and power of the natural world, a reminder that there are forces beyond our comprehension, and that we are all subject to the whims of fate. Through the raven, the Celts understood that life was as much about the unknown as it was about the known, and that death, while inevitable, is just one part of a larger, ever-turning wheel. In the stillness of the night, amidst the mist and the crash of distant thunder, the figure of a woman appears, her eyes dark and knowing, her raven wings spread wide. She is both ancient and ageless, a presence that commands the battlefield, the cycle of life and death forever entwined in her essence. The Morrigan, the goddess of war, fate, and sovereignty, has walked the pages of literature for centuries, her legacy woven deeply into the fabric of both Celtic mythology and the hearts of those who dare to write of her power. In literature, her story lives on, reimagined in tales of war, transformation, and the timeless bond between life and death. The Morrigan's influence can be felt in the very foundation of Celtic-inspired fiction. Her connection to ravens, her role as a goddess who can shift between worlds, and her mastery over the fate of warriors have made her a figure that resonates deeply with writers who seek to explore the themes of power, vengeance, and the supernatural. Her legacy is one of complexity, as she is not merely a goddess of destruction, but also of wisdom and transformation. Through her, writers have been able to tap into the timeless tension between creation and destruction, love and hatred, fate and free will. One of the most striking ways the Morrigan's legacy appears in modern literature is through the motif of the raven, her eternal companion. In numerous works of fantasy and historical fiction, ravens serve as both a symbol of death and a harbinger of fate. In many stories, ravens are associated with characters who wield the Morrigan's power or who are touched by her in some way. Their presence on the battlefield, circling overhead or perched silently among the trees, evokes the feeling that the goddess herself is watching, her gaze cold and unyielding as the forces of fate play out before her. These ravens, as extensions of the Morrigan, embody her dual nature, the promise of victory or the certainty of death, showing that war, and the decisions made within it, are never truly in the hands of mere mortals. Celtic-inspired fantasy literature often draws heavily on the figure of the Morrigan, using her as a central figure or a lurking presence. Authors such as Marion Zimmer Bradley, in her classic The Mists of Avalon, have incorporated elements of the Morrigan into their stories, where the goddess power is felt throughout the lands, shaping the fates of kings, queens, and warriors alike. In Bradley's reimagining of the Arthurian legend, the Morrigan is portrayed not just as a goddess of war, but also as a protector of sovereignty and a keeper of balance. Her ravens serve as both physical manifestations of her will and as symbols of the shadowy forces that govern the world, reinforcing the idea that power comes at a cost, and that the boundaries between life and death are ever present. In the works of authors like Neil Gaiman and Charles Dellent, the Morrigan's legacy takes on a more modern, urban fantasy form, where she is often portrayed as a figure who embodies both the harsh realities of life and the dark mysteries that lie beneath the surface of everyday existence. In Gaiman's American Gods, for example, the goddesses of ancient myth are given new life, their ancient powers translated into a contemporary setting. Though the Morrigan herself does not appear directly, her influence is felt through the figure of the Crows, a group of powerful and mysterious women who share the raven's associations with death and fate. These characters, much like the Morrigan, are both feared and respected, their motivations elusive and their actions often unpredictable. In literature, the Morrigan is not merely a character that exists within the pages of the story, she is an archetype, a symbol of the eternal struggle between the forces of life and death. She embodies the unrelenting power of fate, and her influence can be seen in the way that characters' destinies unfold, often in ways they cannot control. The Morrigan's power is both a blessing and a curse, and her presence in fiction serves as a reminder that fate cannot be escaped, no matter how fiercely one fights against it. In some stories, her intervention is subtle, felt only through the actions of her ravens or the whisper of her voice in the wind. In others, she appears as a direct force, shaping the events that lead to both triumph and tragedy. But it is not just in epic fantasies and historical sagas that the Morrigan's legacy is felt. Her influence can be seen in more contemporary works as well, especially in stories that deal with themes of war, trauma, and the search for meaning in a world torn apart by conflict. In novels such as The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern or The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, the shadow of the Morrigan looms over the characters' fates, reminding them that their lives are not entirely their own. The presence of ravens, both literal and metaphorical, serves as a reminder that the characters are part of something much larger than themselves, a web of destiny that is forever being shaped by the forces of the gods. The Morrigan's legacy in literature is also a reflection of the way in which Celtic mythology continues to shape our understanding of the world. Her association with ravens, the embodiment of fate, and her ability to transcend the boundaries of life and death make her a figure who resonates deeply with our modern understanding of the complexities of existence. The themes of war, transformation, and the inevitable passage of time are just as relevant today as they were in the days of the ancient Celts. The Morrigan, with her multifaceted nature, serves as a symbol of the enduring power of mythology to speak to the human experience, transcending the boundaries of time and culture to remain a force that inspires and challenges us. Her presence in literature serves as a reminder that, while the world may change, the fundamental struggles of humanity, love, loss, fate, and the search for meaning, remain eternal. The Morrigan, as both a goddess of war and a goddess of wisdom, teaches us that life is both beautiful and brutal, a delicate balance between creation and destruction. Her ravens remind us that death is not an end, but a transition, and that fate is something we must all come to terms with, whether we like it or not. In the pages of literature, the Morrigan lives on, her legacy enduring through the stories that continue to be written, her influence as powerful as ever. In the hills of ancient Ireland, where the mist clings to the earth and the land stretches wide under the gray sky, there is a figure that haunts the edges of the known world, a small man, dressed in a coat of green, his beard a sharp contrast to his mischievous grin. He is the leprechaun, but where did he come from? What stories lie hidden behind those twinkling eyes and the tales of pots of gold? To understand the origins of the leprechaun, one must step into the murky depths of Irish folklore, where myth and reality blur together, and the shadows of the past still cast their long, lingering presence. The roots of the leprechaun stretch deep into the heart of Irish mythology. They are not simply the comical, pint-sized creatures of modern popular culture. No, they are older, more complex, and far more mysterious. Their origins are tangled in the strands of ancient stories, much older than the simple images of green suits and pots of gold that have come to define them today. In fact, the leprechaun is thought to have evolved from a variety of different creatures in Irish myth, influenced by earlier tales of fairy folk and elemental spirits that inhabited the landscape long before Christianity took hold of the island. The word leprechaun itself is believed to have its roots in the Irish language, derived from leprechaun, a term that may have originally referred to a small-bodied or little sprite. Some scholars trace it further back to the Old Irish word lucerpan, which translates to small body. This suggests that, from the very beginning, the leprechaun was defined by its size, small, elusive, and often hard to pin down. But though the leprechaun's size may be his most distinguishing feature, it is his role in the folklore of Ireland that truly sets him apart. Early accounts of the leprechaun suggest that he was a solitary figure, a type of fairy or spirit that existed on the fringes of the human world. In many of the earliest stories, the leprechaun was not the jolly trickster we know today, but rather a crafty and cunning figure, one who could easily deceive humans. He was a keeper of secrets, often portrayed as hiding treasure, especially gold, in the earth, sometimes burying it beneath large stones or in the hollow of an ancient tree. The leprechaun's treasure was not simply a source of wealth, but a symbol of the otherworld, of the mysteries and magic that lie hidden beneath the surface of reality. The leprechaun's connection to treasure has led many to believe that he was once viewed as a type of earth spirit, guarding the riches of the land. In ancient Irish beliefs, the earth was full of spirits, creatures that lived in the soil, the rocks, and the streams, controlling the fertility of the land and ensuring the prosperity of the crops. The leprechaun, as a small and elusive creature, could be seen as one of these earth spirits, a guardian of hidden wealth, perhaps linked to the early Celtic gods of nature, such as the Dagda, who wielded control over the land's prosperity. But while the leprechaun's origins are rooted in the world of spirits and magic, his role in folklore has also been shaped by the Celtic belief in the otherworld. In Irish mythology, the otherworld was a realm that existed just beyond the veil of human perception, a place of beauty, danger, and eternal youth. The leprechaun, with his trickster nature and his ability to vanish when caught, is often portrayed as a denizen of the otherworld, an inhabitant of the hidden realm, whose motives and allegiances are shrouded in mystery. Like many creatures from the Celtic otherworld, the leprechaun existed in a world that was parallel to our own, a place where the rules of reality did not always apply, and where those who sought to interact with it often found themselves deceived or ensnared. The leprechaun's association with trickery and mischief can be traced to the larger tradition of Celtic fairies and elves. In these early myths, fairies were not always benevolent. They were capricious, unpredictable, and often mischievous. They enjoyed playing tricks on humans, and would often use their powers to mislead or confuse. The leprechaun, with his love for riddles and clever wordplay, fits neatly into this tradition. He was not just a spirit who guarded treasure, but also a figure who thrived on the chaos of human interaction, testing the wits of those who crossed his path. One of the most enduring aspects of the leprechaun's myth is the tale of the captured leprechaun, where a human attempts to trick the small creature into revealing the location of his hidden treasure. In many of these stories, the leprechaun promises to grant 3 wishes to anyone who can catch him, but only under the condition that the captor must keep their eyes on him at all times. Of course, the clever leprechaun always finds a way to escape, often by using his trickery to make the human look away, thus allowing him to vanish into thin air. These stories highlight the leprechaun's cunning nature, and they serve as a reminder that the creatures of Irish mythology are not to be trusted easily. They thrive on the vulnerability of those who think they can outwit them. As time passed and Ireland underwent cultural changes, particularly with the arrival of Christianity, the leprechaun's role in folklore began to shift. No longer just an otherworldly spirit, the leprechaun gradually became a more humanized figure, his mischievous nature tempered by his association with wealth and luck. He began to appear as a small, often comical figure, sometimes dressed in the green coat and hat that would later become his iconic image. The idea of the leprechaun as a symbol of good fortune, a bringer of luck and treasure, began to take root in the minds of the Irish people, and by the 18th and 19th centuries, the leprechaun had become a staple of Irish folklore. Despite these changes, the core elements of the leprechaun's myth remain rooted in the ancient beliefs of the Celts, the connection to the otherworld, the love of trickery, and the role as a keeper of hidden treasures. The leprechaun is a creature of both mischief and mystery, a reminder of the magic that once lay just beyond the veil of reality. His origins in Irish folklore are deeply entwined with the land itself, with the spirits that inhabit the earth, and with the age-old traditions of the Celts, who believed in the power of the unseen world and the forces that shaped it. The leprechaun, small and elusive, remains a figure who bridges the gap between the mortal and the magical, a symbol of the mysteries that continue to enchant us, even in the modern world. In the quiet corners of the Irish countryside, where the mist rolls off the hills and the air smells of earth and rain, there are whispers of treasure hidden just beneath the soil. In every tale, it's the leprechaun who guards it, his pot of gold waiting at the end of a rainbow, elusive and untouchable. But what is it about this small, trickster creature that connects him so deeply to wealth and fortune? Why, across generations, has the leprechaun been woven into the fabric of Irish folklore as the keeper of hidden treasures, the symbol of gold that we so often associate with luck and prosperity? To understand the symbolism of gold and rainbows in relation to the leprechaun, one must first consider the ancient role of treasure in Irish mythology. Treasure in the Old World was not simply gold and jewels, but rather a symbol of power, security, and divine favor. The Celts believed that the gods and spirits of the otherworld held dominion over all wealth, and it was often through mysterious, supernatural means that wealth could be obtained. The leprechaun, as a creature tied to the otherworld, was believed to be a custodian of these divine riches, his pot of gold symbolizing not just material wealth, but the hidden magic and spiritual power that resided within the earth. In early stories, the leprechaun wasn't always depicted as the whimsical, small man he is today. He was a figure tied to the natural world, an earth spirit who guarded treasures that had been hidden away, often for reasons beyond human understanding. His connection to gold was more than just the allure of riches, it was the wealth of the land, the resources that came from the soil, and the secrets buried beneath the surface of the earth. The pot of gold was a metaphor for the mysterious forces that govern nature, fertility, and prosperity. Gold, in this sense, wasn't simply a material possession, but a token of something far greater, something magical and otherworldly. As the leprechaun's image evolved, however, so too did his association with wealth. The stories began to focus more on the leprechaun's role as a trickster, a keeper of treasure who could grant wishes or lead humans on wild chases in exchange for their freedom. The leprechaun's gold, now associated with human greed and desire, took on a more materialistic role. The legend of the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow became a symbol of unattainable wealth, a promise that could never truly be fulfilled. The rainbow itself, like the leprechaun, was a fleeting thing, appearing only for a moment before fading into the sky. The pot of gold, just out of reach, became the embodiment of a dream that was impossible to capture, no matter how hard one tried. But why rainbows? Why did the leprechaun's gold come to be linked with this beautiful and ephemeral natural phenomenon? Rainbows have long been symbols of both hope and illusion. In Irish folklore, they were seen as bridges between the mortal realm and the mystical world of the fairies and gods. The rainbow's shimmering arc was believed to lead to hidden places, perhaps to the homes of the fairies, or, in the case of the leprechaun's gold, to treasure that was meant to remain elusive. It was the rainbow's connection to both the natural world and the mystical otherworld that made it the perfect symbol for the leprechaun's treasure. Just as the rainbow stretches across the sky, offering a glimpse of something wondrous, the leprechaun's gold beckoned from the shadows, never quite within reach. In many ways, the leprechaun's gold at the end of the rainbow symbolizes the human quest for something more, a desire for wealth, success, and happiness that seems forever just beyond grasp. It taps into the ancient belief that treasure is not simply a reward, but a test, a trial that one must endure to prove their worth. The leprechaun, as the guardian of this treasure, becomes a reflection of human desires and the lengths we will go to obtain that which we believe will bring us fulfillment. Yet, like the rainbow, the treasure is fleeting, and the pursuit of it often leads to folly. Many who have tried to catch the leprechaun or seize his gold have found themselves deceived, misled by the very creatures they sought to outwit. It is a cycle of yearning and disappointment, a reminder that material wealth, while desired, is not the ultimate prize. In the stories, when a person manages to catch the leprechaun, they are often promised 3 wishes, but they must keep their eyes on him at all times. The moment they blink or look away, the leprechaun vanishes, taking both his gold and their chance at fortune with him. This chase after wealth, the promise of riches and the trickery that accompanies it, is a metaphor for the human condition. We are often so focused on the allure of material success that we forget the true value lies not in what we possess, but in the journey we take to seek it. The leprechaun's pot of gold, glittering in the distance, is a symbol of both the fulfillment and the emptiness that come with the pursuit of wealth. Over time, as the leprechaun's image became more ingrained in popular culture, his role as a keeper of wealth shifted to that of a symbol of good fortune. His gold, once a mysterious and magical treasure, became a more straightforward representation of luck. The leprechaun, now seen as a more humorous and endearing figure, was no longer just the guardian of hidden riches, but the embodiment of a whimsical luck that could be bestowed upon those fortunate enough to encounter him. The pot of gold at the end of the rainbow became the ultimate prize for those who found the leprechaun, a sign that luck was on their side, and that prosperity was within reach. In modern times, the symbolism of the leprechaun's gold and the rainbow continues to endure. In stories, advertisements, and even St. Patrick's Day celebrations, the leprechaun remains a figure of fortune and luck, a reminder of the rewards that await those who are fortunate enough to find them. Yet, despite this lighter, more cheerful portrayal, the ancient connection between the leprechaun and the earth's treasures, the gold that lies buried beneath the surface, remains a potent reminder of the deeper, more mystical roots of this iconic figure. The leprechaun, with his gold and his rainbow, still represents the fleeting nature of wealth, the elusiveness of our desires, and the trickery that often accompanies our pursuit of fortune. The leprechaun, once a mysterious and elusive figure nestled deep in the folds of Irish mythology, has undergone a profound transformation over the centuries. From ancient tales of mischievous spirits to the modern-day mascot of St. Patrick's Day, the leprechaun has morphed into a symbol that, while still rooted in its mythological origins, carries a new and lighter meaning. How did a figure known for his trickery, his elusive gold, and his role as a guardian of the otherworld become the whimsical creature we see today, clad in green and grinning for the cameras? The story of the leprechaun's evolution begins in the misty past, where he was not the cheerful character we know now, but rather a more sinister, complex being tied to the spiritual world. In early Irish mythology, the leprechaun was a type of fairy, connected to the otherworldly creatures that inhabited the misty hills and dark forests. These creatures, often regarded with both reverence and fear, were not the jolly spirits of today's folklore, but rather cunning and elusive beings that could deceive or mislead humans. Leprechauns, in their earliest forms, were often portrayed as solitary figures, small, old men with beards and sharp eyes, masters of disguise and trickery, who would guard treasures hidden in the earth. Their gold was not just a material possession but a symbol of the mystical forces that controlled the land, and they were seen as part of a larger spiritual hierarchy, with their own roles in the complex world of Celtic folklore. But the leprechaun's association with wealth, magic, and trickery began to take on a more playful tone over time. As Ireland moved into the medieval and early modern periods, the world of folklore shifted along with it. Christianity began to take root, and with it came a change in the way the Irish viewed their old gods and spirits. The once feared fairy folk were reimagined as beings that were more comical than threatening, more approachable and less divine. The leprechaun, with his affinity for mischief, started to be seen less as a powerful spirit and more as a figure of fun, still clever and elusive, but no longer a symbol of the mysterious forces of nature. His role as a guardian of treasure was maintained, but the gold he guarded became less a symbol of divine wealth and more a representation of the fortune that was waiting to be claimed by those with the wit and cunning to catch him. By the 17th and 18th centuries, the leprechaun had begun to be associated more with the spirit of the Irish people, crafty, resilient, and always managing to survive despite the odds. His portrayal as a solitary figure who lived on the fringes of human society, hidden in the remote corners of the country, reflected the Irish people's own sense of independence and determination. The leprechaun's trickery became a reflection of the resourcefulness that the Irish had developed over centuries of struggle, and he came to symbolize the small victories that could be won through wit and cunning, rather than strength or power. But it wasn't until the 19th century that the leprechaun began to take on the familiar form that we recognize today. As Ireland became more integrated into the British Empire and Irish nationalism began to rise, the leprechaun was embraced as a national symbol. No longer just a figure from folklore, he became a representation of Irish identity itself. The leprechaun's green attire, which had once been a simple feature of his costume, became a symbol of Ireland's lush, green landscape and the Irish people's connection to the land. The figure of the leprechaun, once a mischievous trickster, began to be seen as a representation of Irish pride and resilience. With the rise of Irish nationalism and the celebration of St. Patrick's Day in the 19th and 20th centuries, the leprechaun began to take on new layers of meaning. He became a mascot of sorts, a symbol of Irish culture that could be easily marketed and celebrated. His gold, once a symbol of hidden wealth and otherworldly power, was now a symbol of prosperity and luck, easily associated with the good fortune that the Irish people hoped to achieve in the new century. The leprechaun's image shifted from that of a solitary, somewhat sinister creature to that of a jolly, good-natured figure, one that people could enjoy and celebrate. This transformation reached its peak in the 20th century, when the leprechaun became a fixture in global pop culture. Advertisements, cartoons, and films began to feature the leprechaun in a way that was far removed from his mythological roots. He became a character who was not just part of Irish folklore, but part of a worldwide, commercialized image of Ireland itself. His green coat, his shiny buckle, and his cheeky grin became symbols of St. Patrick's Day festivities, a day of celebration that was embraced by people of all backgrounds, whether or not they had any Irish heritage. The leprechaun was now a figure of fun, a part of the collective imagination that could be enjoyed by people from all walks of life. This modern leprechaun, playful, lucky, and sometimes even charming, has, of course, lost some of the darker, more complex aspects of his ancient origins. The trickster spirit that once made the leprechaun a figure to be feared or respected has been softened, and his gold is no longer a symbol of otherworldly mystery but of easy fortune and cheer. The leprechaun's evolution from ancient myth to modern-day mascot reflects the changing nature of Irish identity, as well as the way folklore evolves to fit the cultural needs of different times. Today, the leprechaun is everywhere, from the small figurines and gift shops to the mascot of cereal brands, to the costumes worn by revelers on St. Patrick's Day. He is no longer just a figure of Irish myth, but a universal symbol of good luck, mischief, and the spirit of celebration. But in all his transformations, he still carries with him echoes of his origins, the guardian of treasure, the trickster spirit, and the mysterious being from the otherworld. The leprechaun, in all his forms, continues to captivate our imaginations, reminding us that, no matter how much he changes, there will always be something magical and elusive about him, something that keeps us chasing that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Long before the rise of the Celts, before the great battles that would shape the history of Ireland, there were the Fir Bolg. Ancient and enigmatic, They are the forgotten people of Irish mythology, beings whose very existence blends the line between myth and history. The stories of the Fir Bolg are woven into the tapestry of Ireland's earliest legends, told in fragments, their lives intertwined with the gods, the land, and the great cosmic struggles that shaped the destiny of the island. The Fir Bolg were said to be a race of giants, ancient beings who lived in Ireland long before the arrival of the Tuatha Dé Danann, the divine tribe that would come to rule the land. Their name, meaning men of the bag or bag men, comes from the sacks or bags they carried, often filled with earth or tools. This humble connection to the earth was a reflection of their way of life, tied to nature in a way that was both primal and foundational. They were a people of strength and endurance, survivors who had lived through trials and tribulations that had shaped them into a hardy, resilient race. According to the mythological texts, the Fir Bolg were descendants of an ancient race that had been exiled from Greece. Their journey to Ireland, driven by a series of divine and earthly struggles, was not without hardship. They first settled in a distant land, where they ruled for many years before being driven out by a force stronger than their own. Forced to leave, they eventually made their way to Ireland, where they established themselves as the dominant people of the land. For centuries, the Fir Bolg thrived in Ireland, reigning over the land with a quiet strength. They were an agricultural people, attuned to the rhythms of nature and the changing seasons. They built their communities around the land, their settlements growing along the rivers and valleys of the island. Their connection to the earth was sacred. They were said to have a deep understanding of the natural world, its cycles and forces, and the creatures that roamed it. The Fir Bolg were a people who understood the balance of life and death, of growth and decay, and they lived in harmony with the land that provided for them. But as with all things in myth, their peace would not last forever. The arrival of the Tuatha Dé Danann, a race of divine beings with powers far beyond those of the Fir Bolg, marked the beginning of the end for this ancient race. The Tuatha Dé Danann were said to be gods and goddesses, possessing knowledge and magic that would reshape the very fabric of Ireland. Their arrival on the island brought with it a great upheaval, and the Fir Bolg found themselves outmatched in both strength and magic. The struggle between the Fir Bolg and the Tuatha Dé Danann culminated in the Battle of Mag Twyard, one of the most pivotal events in Irish mythology. It was here that the two races clashed, the Fir Bolg fighting with all the might they could muster against the divine beings who had come to claim their place in Ireland. The battle was fierce, but ultimately, the Fir Bolg were defeated. Their king, Eachcéid, was slain, and their people were scattered across the island. Though they were no longer the rulers of Ireland, their legacy lived on, their stories carried forward through the ages. Despite their defeat, the Fir Bolg were not forgotten. Their mythological significance lies not only in their role in the battle, but also in their connection to the land and the ancient world they represented. The Fir Bolg were more than just a people, they were a symbol of a time long past, an era in which the forces of nature and the gods were in a delicate balance. They were the guardians of an ancient order, one that was ultimately displaced by the more powerful Tuatha Dé Danann, but not without leaving their mark on the world. In later mythological accounts, the Fir Bolg were seen as the ancestors of the Irish people, the first settlers of the land whose way of life was rooted in the earth itself. Their story was one of survival, of resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. They were a race of giants who lived in a time when the gods walked the earth, and their place in the mythological narrative is a testament to the power of the land and the forces that shape it. The Fir Bolg's mythological significance extends beyond their role in the battle with the Tuatha Dé Danann. They represent the ancient, pre-Celtic world, an era that was eventually overrun by the arrival of new gods and new peoples. Their connection to the land, their mastery of agriculture, and their understanding of nature made them a symbol of a time when humanity was in tune with the earth and its cycles. They were a reflection of the deep, primal connection between humankind and the natural world, a connection that would be lost to the gods and the more powerful races that followed. The stories of the Fir Bolg, though overshadowed by the more famous tales of the Tuatha Dé Danann and the Celtic gods, remain an integral part of the Irish mythological tradition. They are a reminder of the ancient forces that shaped the land, of the giants who once roamed the hills and valleys of Ireland, and of the forgotten people who lived in harmony with the earth before the arrival of the gods. The Fir-Bolg may have been defeated in battle, but their story continues to echo through the centuries, a testament to the endurance of the ancient peoples who once called Ireland their home. The earth trembled, the sky darkened, and the winds howled as two ancient forces clashed on the blood-soaked fields of Mag Twyard. It was a battle unlike any other in the history of Ireland, where gods and giants, the children of the land and the children of the heavens, fought for dominion over the island. The Fir-Bolg, ancient giants whose power was drawn from the earth itself, faced the Tuatha De Danann, the divine race of gods with powers beyond mortal comprehension. This was no ordinary battle. It was the clash of two worlds, one ancient and primal, the other mystical and otherworldly. The Fir-Bolg had ruled Ireland for centuries, their strength and endurance matched only by their deep connection to the land. They were not gods, but they were mighty in their own right. Their hands were rough and calloused from working the earth, their bodies forged through generations of survival and toil. They had a simple, powerful belief: the land was theirs to protect, and they would do so with every ounce of strength they possessed. Their kings, like Eachcaidd, were warriors who led their people with the wisdom of the ages, their hearts resolute in the face of any threat. But when the Tuatha De Danann arrived in Ireland, the ground shook beneath the feet of the Fir-Bolg. The gods came with a purpose: to claim the land that had once been theirs, to restore a divine order to the world. They were beings of magic and light, their powers vast and incomprehensible. They were the children of Danu, the great mother goddess, and each one carried with them the gifts of their divine parentage. The Tuatha De Danann brought with them weapons that could shatter mountains, and powers that could bend the very fabric of the universe. They were beings who commanded the elements, who could shape the skies and command the seas. And with them came a promise of change, of a new era, where the divine would reign and the giants of the earth would be forgotten. The Fir-Bolg, proud and strong, did not bow to the will of the gods. They fought back with the ferocity of creatures that knew the land as their own. They wielded their weapons with skill and determination, but they were no match for the might of the Tuatha De Danann. The gods were not only powerful in their abilities, but they were also clever, using their magic to deceive and outwit the Fir-Bolg at every turn. The Fir-Bolg, who had relied on their strength and cunning for so long, found themselves overwhelmed by the sheer force of the gods' power. It was a battle of raw might against ancient wisdom, a contest between the primal forces of the earth and the transcendent beings of the heavens. As the battle raged on, the sky seemed to crack open with the roar of thunder, and the ground shook with the sound of the gods' fury. The Fir-Bolg fought valiantly, but their strength was no match for the divine might of the Tuatha De Danann. One by one, their warriors fell, their blood staining the earth they had once protected. The battle was not just a struggle for land, it was a struggle for survival, for the very essence of the Fir-Bolg people. King Eachcaidd, the leader of the Fir-Bolg, stood tall amidst the chaos, his heart heavy with the weight of his people's fate. He had led his people through countless trials, but this was a trial unlike any they had faced before. The gods, it seemed, were invincible. And yet, despite the odds, Eachcaidd and his warriors fought on, refusing to surrender, even as the heavens themselves seemed to turn against them. But in the end, it was not strength that decided the fate of the Fir-Bolg, but the will of the gods. The Tuatha De Danann, wielding their magic with precision and power, struck down the Fir-Bolg one by one. The battle was won, and the gods claimed the land they had come to conquer. But in the aftermath, the victory felt hollow. The gods had won, but at what cost? The Fir-Bolg were not entirely vanquished. Many of their people fled, scattered across the land, their fate uncertain. Some say that they retreated into the hills, their lives hidden from the eyes of the gods. Others claim that they were absorbed into the lands and peoples that followed, their memory fading into legend. But no matter what happened to them after the battle, the Fir-Bolg left an indelible mark on the land they had fought to protect. They were the giants who had once ruled, the mighty people who had stood against the gods themselves. The Battle of Mag Twyard was not just a contest between two peoples, it was a defining moment in the mythology of Ireland. It marked the end of one age and the beginning of another. The Tuatha De Danann, with their divine powers, would rule the land, but the Fir-Bolg's legacy would live on in the very earth they had fought to protect. Their connection to the land, their resilience, and their fierce protection of their home became a symbol of the eternal struggle between the natural world and the forces of power beyond. The blood that stained the earth at Mag Twyard would not be easily forgotten, and neither would the giants who had dared to challenge the gods. In the quiet aftermath, as the battle cries faded into silence, the land itself seemed to mourn the loss of the Fir Bolg. The trees swayed as if in sorrow, the rivers flowed more slowly, and the wind carried the echoes of their fallen warriors. The gods, victorious but somber, knew that the power they had claimed came at a price. The Fir Bolg had been their equal in many ways, their strength, their wisdom, and their love for the land undeniable. The gods had triumphed, but in doing so, they had silenced a voice that had once been as old as the earth itself. Over time, the stories of the Fir Bolg would be woven into the tapestry of Irish mythology, their names whispered on the wind and carried in the songs of bards. Though they had fallen in battle, they had not been forgotten. In every stone, in every hill, and in every stream that ran through Ireland, the spirit of the Fir Bolg endured. They were the forgotten giants, but their legacy lived on in the very fabric of the land they had once ruled. The Tuatha De Danann, for all their power, would never truly possess the land in the way the Fir Bolg had. The gods had won the battle, but the earth, the deep, ancient soil that had cradled the giants, would always remember. The struggle between the giants and the gods had ended, but in the heart of Ireland, the battle was far from over. The story of the Fir Bolg would forever remind the people of the land that no victory was ever without consequence, and no battle ever truly ended. The earth, after all, belongs to the ones who protect it, who love it, and who fight to keep its spirit alive. Thus, the myths of the Fir Bolg and their clash with the gods would echo through the ages, a reminder of the strength and resilience of those who came before, of the giants who stood tall against the heavens. Their fight, though long past, would never truly fade, for it was written into the soul of the land they had fought so fiercely to defend. In the rolling hills, the misty moors, and the ancient stone circles of Ireland and Scotland, the echoes of giants can still be felt. These places, steeped in myth and legend, bear the marks of those ancient beings who once roamed the earth, creatures of immense strength and towering stature, whose very presence seemed to shape the land itself. The stories of these giants, particularly the Fir Bolg and other mythological races, linger like whispers in the wind, woven into the very fabric of the landscape. One of the most striking ways in which these giants are said to have left their mark is through the stone monuments and cairns that the Celtic countryside. These ancient structures, many of which predate written history, are often associated with the giants of myth. The passage tombs of Newgrange, Knowth, and Douth in Ireland, for example, are believed to have been constructed by a people of extraordinary skill, giants in the eyes of later generations. Their massive stones, carefully placed and perfectly aligned with the celestial movements, are said to be the work of beings whose hands could lift mountains and whose hearts beat in rhythm with the earth itself. The very act of creating such monumental structures would have required a strength and vision far beyond that of ordinary humans. As the myths tell it, the giants were not just builders, they were also the defenders and caretakers of the land. The hills and valleys of Ireland are dotted with names and places that trace the paths of these ancient beings. The Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland, a natural formation of hexagonal basalt columns, is perhaps the most famous of these sites. Legend has it that the causeway was built by the giant Finn MacCool, a legendary hero who, according to myth, constructed the causeway to cross into Scotland and challenge his rival, the Scottish giant Bonandanir. The columns themselves are said to be the remnants of this great battle, a testament to the titanic struggle between two giants of mythic proportions. Even the very shape of the land seems to recall their presence, rugged, untamed, and full of mystery. Further south, in the Irish countryside, the Slieve Bloom Mountains stand as silent witnesses to the giant's ancient reign. The name Slieve Bloom is derived from the Irish word Sliab, meaning mountain, and is associated with the mythical battles and struggles of the Fir Bolg. The mountains themselves, with their deep valleys and towering peaks, evoke the image of giants standing watch over the land, their enormous forms casting long shadows over the rolling hills below. The very landscape itself seems to hum with the energy of these ancient beings, a connection between the natural world and the legendary creatures that once inhabited it. In Scotland, the legends of giants are similarly woven into the landscape. The Highlands, with their dramatic peaks and misty glens, are home to tales of monstrous beings who roamed the land long before the arrival of the gods. The Giant's Grave on the Isle of Skye, a large stone formation that resembles a human figure, is said to be the final resting place of a mighty giant who once ruled the island. Locals speak of the giant's enormous size, his strength, and his connection to the earth. His presence is said to have shaped the very land he walked upon, leaving behind a legacy that can still be felt in the stone formations and the contours of the island's landscape. In the wilds of Wales, the tales of giants are no less vivid. The mountains of Snowdonia, with their craggy cliffs and sweeping vistas, are said to be the remnants of an ancient battle between giants. The name Snowdonia itself is linked to the legendary giant Idris, a figure of immense power who was said to have shaped the mountains with his hands. In some versions of the legend, Idris is said to have carved the valleys and peaks as he walked, his footsteps leaving a permanent imprint on the land. The very landscape of Snowdonia, with its jagged ridges and hidden valleys, feels like a giant's playground, shaped by the hand of an ancient being who once walked the earth. The Celtic landscape, rich with its ancient stone circles, burial mounds, and natural wonders, serves as a living testament to the giants of myth. Each stone, each mountain, each river tells a story of beings whose lives were as grand and untamed as the land they inhabited. These places are not just physical locations, they are living memories, charged with the energy of the giants who once walked them. The legends of the Fir Bolg, the Tuatha De Danann, and other ancient races are interwoven with the very soil of Ireland and Scotland, shaping not only the myths, but the way the land itself is perceived. Even today, the influence of these giants can be felt. The names of places, Giant's Causeway, Giant's Grave, Giant's Seat, serve as reminders of a time when the earth was inhabited by beings of tremendous power, who shaped the world with their hands and hearts. These traces, left behind in the landscapes of the Celts, are more than just relics of the past. They are living connections to a time when giants walked the earth, reminding us that the land is not just a passive backdrop to our lives, but a vibrant, living entity that carries with it the memory of everything that has ever walked upon it. As you walk through these landscapes, whether along the ancient stone paths or up the misty slopes of a mountain, you can feel it, the faintest trace of something ancient, something powerful, something otherworldly. It's as if the giants themselves are still with us, their strength and their stories etched into the earth, waiting for the next soul to come along and listen. In the silence of these sacred places, the giants live on. In the quietest corners of Ireland, hidden deep in the hills or beneath the ancient oaks, there is a world that most of us will never see. It exists just beyond the veil of our own, a world so close, yet so far, where beings of unimaginable beauty, power, and grace reside. These are the city, pronounced she, the noble and otherworldly creatures of Celtic myth. While we walk our paths, unaware of their presence, the city moves silently through the ether, watching, waiting, and weaving their magic in the hidden realms. To the Celts, the city were not mere fantasy or figments of imagination. They were real, living beings, part of the ancient fabric of the world. These ethereal spirits, often described as shining, beautiful, and impossibly regal, were believed to be the descendants of the gods, the Tuatha De Danann, who had once walked the earth. But the city were not gods themselves, they were a race of immortals, beings who lived in a realm beyond human reach, where time was as fluid as the wind and the boundaries between the living and the dead were blurred. The city were known for their otherworldly beauty, with their luminous skin and eyes that sparkled like the stars themselves. They were as regal in their demeanor as they were in appearance, dressed in garments of shimmering silk, and their presence commanded respect. They were often seen riding white horses, their long flowing hair shimmering in the moonlight, their laughter like the tinkling of silver bells. Yet for all their grace and majesty, they were not to be approached carelessly. Their realm was not one to be trespassed lightly. The city inhabited the otherworld, a realm that was said to be located just beneath the surface of the earth, hidden from the eyes of mortals. Their homes were the fairy mounds, the ancient burial sites scattered throughout the landscape, silent, mystical places where the earth opened up into the vast, mysterious world of the city. These mounds were not just tombs or burial sites, they were doorways, thresholds that led to the realms of the immortal beings who had once been the rulers of the land. There, in their otherworldly palaces, the city continued their eternal existence, untouched by time. Their lives were a mix of revelry and ancient sorrow, a dance between the joyous and the tragic. The city were not evil, but neither were they benevolent in the human sense. Their realm was one where the rules of the mortal world did not apply, where desires could be fulfilled but at great cost. To interact with the city was to risk being swept away into their world, to be forever changed by the magic that flowed through their veins. In many tales, the city were depicted as benevolent beings who would grant favors or bestow blessings upon those who honored them. Those who treated the fairy mounds with respect, who offered gifts or prayers, might find themselves favored by the city, receiving good fortune, health, or wisdom in return. But those who dared to disrespect or challenge them were often met with punishment, swift and unforgiving. The city had a deep connection to the natural world, and they were quick to defend it from those who threatened it. Their magic, bound to the very earth itself, could bring both great beauty and terrible destruction. There were also tales of mortals being taken by the city either through enchantments or force. Those who wandered too close to the fairy mounds, lost in the wild beauty of the land, might find themselves lured into the otherworld by the city, never to return. Some stories told of mortals who had spent what seemed like only a few hours in the realm of the city, only to emerge years or decades later, their lives stolen by time. The city were creatures of timelessness, and to them, time had no meaning. What was a lifetime to a mortal was but a fleeting moment to the beings of the otherworld. One of the most famous tales involving the city is that of the beautiful and tragic Queen Maeve, whose kingdom was said to have been watched over by the city. It is said that she, in all her beauty and power, once ventured too far into the realm of the city and was swept away by their enchantments. Her tale, filled with both love and loss, serves as a reminder of the city's power over fate and destiny. But not all cities were fair and kind. Some were capricious, their mood swinging from benevolence to cruelty in the blink of an eye. They were creatures of the unknown, beings whose intentions were often as mysterious as their nature. They could be both helpful and destructive, depending on the whims of the moment. In one tale, a group of mortal children were invited to the otherworld by the city, only to discover that they had been lured there to be forever trapped in the fairy realm, never able to return to their families. For the Celts, the city were not to be feared, but they were to be respected, for their power was not to be taken lightly. They were creatures of the otherworld, existing outside the mortal realm, and as such, they represented a connection to something much larger than the human experience, a connection to the divine, to the mystical forces that shaped the world. The city were both the protectors of nature and the keepers of secrets, holding knowledge and magic beyond the comprehension of mere mortals. Today, the city continued to live in the whispers of ancient forests and the shadows of the hills. Their legends are passed down through generations, their presence still felt in the moonlit night, when the veil between worlds is thinnest. In every fairy mound, every stone circle, every patch of wild land untouched by time, there lingers the essence of the city, the noble, otherworldly beings who once walked the earth and still dance among the stars. Beneath the shimmering twilight, where the boundaries between light and shadow blur, lies the court of the city, a world as magnificent as it is treacherous. Among the city, there exists a delicate balance of power, a dichotomy that reflects the duality of their nature, the seelie court and the unseelie court. These two courts are not merely opposites, they are complementary forces, embodying the beauty and peril of the otherworld. Their tales are as old as the hills they dwell beneath, and their presence resonates in the whisper of the wind and the rustle of leaves underfoot. The seelie court, often seen as the bright and benevolent aspect of the city, shines with an aura of ethereal splendor. Its members are described as radiant, with an almost unbearable beauty that leaves mortals breathless. The seelie are often associated with summer's warmth, the blossoming of flowers, and the golden glow of sunlight filtering through ancient forests. Yet their allure is not without a touch of danger. They are kind, yes, but their kindness is not unconditional. The Seelie court favors justice and reciprocity, rewarding those who show respect and loyalty while punishing those who dare to insult or harm their kind. Many tales tell of travelers who, lost and desperate, found themselves in the presence of the Seelie. A glowing path might appear before them, guiding them to safety, or a gift of healing herbs might be offered by a shining figure in the moonlight. Yet these acts of kindness come with unspoken rules. The mortals must not speak of what they've seen, nor may they neglect to offer gratitude. A forgotten thank you, a thoughtless word, and the warmth of the Seelie court can quickly turn cold. The Unseelie court, in stark contrast, is the shadow to the Seelie's light. It thrives in the darker aspects of existence, its members more fearsome than fair, more wild than regal. The Unseelie are often associated with the chill of autumn winds, the barrenness of winter, and the foreboding stillness of night. Their beauty, if it can be called that, is a terrible, haunting thing, more like the sharp edge of a knife than the soft bloom of a rose. Unlike the Seelie, the Unseelie court requires no provocation to act. They are capricious and unpredictable, their actions governed by whim rather than moral codes. Travelers who stray too close to their domain might find themselves ensnared by their dark glamour, lured into traps from which few escape. The Unseelie are said to delight in chaos, their laughter echoing like thunder as they revel in the fear they inspire. Yet, even they are not without their strange sense of honor. Some tales speak of mortals who, through bravery or cunning, earned the respect of the Unseelie and were granted boons as rare as they were perilous. Despite their differences, the Seelie and Unseelie are not enemies in the traditional sense. They are more like two sides of the same coin, their interplay shaping the delicate balance of the otherworld. Both courts hold sway over the forces of nature, each bringing their own energy to the cycle of life and death, growth and decay. A mortal who encounters one court may find themselves inexplicably drawn into the orbit of the other, their fate tied to the whims of these ancient beings. Legends speak of rare occasions when the Seelie and Unseelie meet, their courts mingling in uneasy truce. These gatherings are said to occur at liminal times, on the cusp of dusk and dawn, or during the turning of the seasons, when the veil between their worlds is thinnest. The air grows thick with tension, for even in peace, the courts carry with them the weight of their respective powers. It is during these moments that the Seelie are at their most unpredictable, and mortals would do well to tread carefully. One of the most enduring stories of the court's interplay involves a mortal musician who, through his enchanting melodies, caught the attention of both Seelie and Unseelie alike. The Seelie queen offered him the gift of eternal inspiration, while the Unseelie king tempted him with the promise of untold power. Torn between light and shadow, the musician's choice would determine not only his own fate but the balance of the courts themselves. The tale, like many involving the Seelie, ends ambiguously, a reminder of the complexities and contradictions that define these otherworldly beings. For the Celts, the Seelie and Unseelie courts were not mere abstractions, but reflections of the world's duality, light and dark, creation and destruction, mercy and wrath. To them, the Seelie were not simply to be feared or revered, they were to be understood, their intricate dances of power and personality offering a glimpse into the mysteries of existence. The courts serve as a reminder that the world is rarely black and white, and that even in the brightest light, shadows linger, just as beauty can be found even in the deepest darkness. The Seelie and Unseelie courts continue to captivate the imagination, their legends woven into stories, songs, and even modern interpretations. They remind us of the thin line we walk between grace and peril, between the radiant allure of kindness and the untamed power of the unknown. As the sun sets and the mists rise, the court of the Seelie waits, their world ever present, just out of reach, ready to reveal itself to those brave, or foolish, enough to look. In the quiet sanctuaries of modern pagan circles, the Seelie have found a presence both enduring and evolving. Though their roots stretch deep into the soil of ancient Celtic lore, their whispers continue to ripple through the practices and beliefs of those who seek connection with the unseen. For many modern pagans, the Seelie are not merely relics of myth, but living spirits, vibrant and active, woven into the fabric of nature and the spiritual world. The Seelie often represent a bridge between the human and the divine, a link to the ancestral past, and a symbol of the sacred in the natural world. Those who honor the city do so with a reverence born of both respect and caution. Unlike benevolent deities, the city embody an untamed energy that demands a delicate balance of trust and wariness. Modern practitioners approach them not as masters to be served, but as equals to be honored, beings who deserve respect for their power and sovereignty. Rituals involving the city are often deeply personal, performed in quiet, liminal spaces where the barriers between the worlds are believed to be thin. Dawn and dusk, solstices and equinoxes, and moonlit nights all hold special significance for those who wish to connect with these otherworldly beings. Offerings are a key component of these practices, with gifts left at natural sites thought to be the city's domain. These offerings are simple yet meaningful: milk, honey, bread, flowers, or shiny objects like coins and crystals. Each item is chosen with care, imbued with intent, and left with a heartfelt request or expression of gratitude. For some, the city are guardians of the land, their presence tied to the health of the natural world. Forests, rivers, and sacred groves are often seen as their dwelling places, and modern pagans who honor the city may engage in acts of environmental stewardship as a form of devotion. Planting trees, cleaning polluted streams, or simply tending to a neglected patch of earth are seen not only as acts of ecological care, but also as gestures of respect toward the city. In these moments, the boundaries between the spiritual and the physical blur, and the connection between human and otherworldly deepens. There are also those who seek the guidance of the city in divination and spiritual growth. The city are believed to possess ancient wisdom, an understanding of the cycles of nature and the mysteries of existence. Through meditative practices, dream work, or rituals involving scrying and tarot, modern pagans invite the city to share their insights. Yet, this is never done lightly, for the city's wisdom often comes in riddles or visions that challenge the seeker to confront uncomfortable truths. Modern interpretations of the city are diverse, reflecting the individualistic nature of contemporary paganism. Some view the city as literal beings, fairies or spirits who dwell in the otherworld and occasionally cross into ours. Others see them as archetypes or symbols, representing forces of nature, creativity, or transformation. Still, others experience the city as guides or allies, their presence felt in moments of inspiration, intuition, or serendipity. Regardless of interpretation, the city remain a source of wonder and mystery, their influence extending into the spiritual practices of those who feel their call. Despite the reverence they inspire, the city are not romanticized or stripped of their complexity in modern pagan practices. Their capricious nature, their ability to bless or curse, and their deep ties to the land and its cycles are all acknowledged. This complexity is what makes them so compelling, a reminder that the spiritual world is as wild and unpredictable as the natural one. In some traditions, the city are also seen as allies in the work of reclaiming ancestral heritage. For those who trace their lineage to Celtic lands, honoring the city is a way of reconnecting with the stories and spirits of their ancestors. This connection is not about nostalgia but about living in harmony with the lessons of the past, allowing ancient wisdom to inform modern life. As the world grows more disconnected from nature, the cities serve as a poignant reminder of what has been lost and what can still be found. They are called to remember the magic in the mundane, the sacred in the wild, and the power in the unseen. For those who honor them, the city are both a challenge and an invitation, a chance to step outside the ordinary and glimpse the extraordinary, if only for a moment. And in that moment, the veil between the worlds grows thin, and the presence of the city feels closer than ever. In the heart of Celtic identity lies a profound connection to mythical creatures, beings that are as much a part of the cultural psyche as the rugged landscapes they inhabit. These creatures are not merely fantastical, they are threads woven into the fabric of Celtic life, their presence shaping beliefs, traditions, and even the ways people understood themselves and their place in the world. They were not just figures of imagination but reflections of the collective soul of a people, echoes of a worldview that valued the interplay of the seen and unseen, the natural and supernatural. For the Celts, mythical creatures served as intermediaries between mortals and the otherworld, a realm where time bent and reality was fluid. They were harbingers, guides, and sometimes tricksters, their actions teaching lessons that transcended their immediate stories. Around spectral hounds, the CWN, and were not merely ghostly hunters, they were symbols of fate and the inexorable pull of death. The Púca, with its shape-shifting mischief, reflected the unpredictability of life and the need for adaptability. Each creature carried with it a meaning, a lesson, and a warning. These beings also defined the relationship between the Celts and their environment. The Selkies, for instance, were guardians of the natural world, their presence inseparable from the hills, rivers, and groves they called home. To disrespect the land was to risk angering the Selkies, a belief that reinforced a deep reverence for nature. The Kelpie, lurking in the depths of lochs and rivers, embodied the dangers of the untamed wilds, a stark reminder of the perils hidden in beauty. Through these creatures, the Celts found ways to articulate their awe and respect for the natural world's power and mystery. Celtic mythical creatures also served as symbols of community and lineage. The Banshee, for example, was not merely a wailing spirit but a figure deeply tied to familial identity. Her mournful cry was both a harbinger of death and a reminder of the bonds that connected members of a clan across generations. To hear her wail was to confront the inevitability of mortality while reaffirming one's place within a larger, enduring family structure. Similarly, tales of giants like the fir-bald reinforced a sense of shared history and resilience, their stories speaking to the struggles and triumphs of a people who saw themselves as inheritors of a vast and powerful legacy. In the Celts' oral traditions, mythical creatures became the focal points of storytelling, their tales passed down through generations. These stories were not static, they evolved with each telling, adapting to the needs of the moment while preserving the core truths they carried. The creatures within these tales were not distant figures but active participants in the lives of those who told and heard their stories. They were metaphors, yes, but they were also real in the sense that they shaped how people lived, thought, and dreamed. As the Celts faced external pressures, Roman invasions, Christianization, and the erosion of their traditional way of life, mythical creatures became symbols of resistance and identity. They represented a world that could not be fully conquered or subdued, a reminder of the Celts' enduring spirit. Even as Christian monks recorded these tales in manuscripts like the Liber Gabala Erin and the Mabinogion, the creatures retained their power, their otherworldly nature reframed but never entirely diminished. In modern times, Celtic mythical creatures continue to resonate, their stories finding new life in literature, art, and popular culture. They have become symbols of a heritage that refuses to be forgotten, their enduring presence a testament to the strength of the identity they helped shape. For many, they are a source of inspiration and a connection to a past that feels both distant and immediate. The CWN and the Púca, the city, they are more than relics of a bygone era. They are living symbols, their meanings evolving but their essence unchanged. To speak of Celtic identity is to speak of these creatures, not as curiosities of myth, but as embodiments of a worldview that saw the sacred in the everyday, the magical in the mundane. They remind us that identity is not just about what is seen, but about what is felt, believed, and imagined. Through them, the Celts found a way to articulate the complexities of life, the beauty of nature, and the mysteries of existence. And through their stories, those lessons continue to echo, a reminder that the mythical is never far from the real. In the misty hills, shadowed forests, and windswept shores of Celtic lands, the line between myth and landscape blurs like a twilight haze. To the Celts, the earth was not inert but alive, infused with spirit and story. Every craggy mountain, shimmering loch, and ancient oak held echoes of the otherworld, where gods, spirits, and mythical creatures roamed. The landscape was both a canvas and a mirror, reflecting the myths that shaped the Celtic imagination while grounding them in the tangible world. Each feature of the land carried a narrative, its contours shaped by the hands of giants, the hooves of spectral horses, or the tears of grieving deities. The towering cliffs of Ireland were said to be the remnants of battles between the Tuatha De Danann and the fir-bald, their jagged edges reminders of divine struggles etched into the earth itself. Loch Ness, with its mysterious depths, harbored tales of the Kelpie, a water horse that lured the unwary into its shadowy embrace. These stories were not simply embellishments, they were ways of understanding the world, making sense of its beauty, danger, and unpredictability. In Celtic belief, the landscape was a threshold, a place where the veil between the human and the otherworld was thin. Sacred groves, stone circles, and hill forts were not just physical locations, but spiritual gateways, places where the ordinary gave way to the extraordinary. The city, or fairy folk, were said to dwell in hollow hills, their otherworldly courts hidden beneath mounds of earth that hummed with a quiet, eternal magic. To tread near these places was to risk crossing into their domain, an act that could bring either blessing or misfortune. Rivers and streams were lifelines, their waters carrying not only sustenance but the whispers of the divine. The river Boyne, for example, was linked to the goddess Bone, whose defiance of sacred rules led to the river's creation. Her story imbued the Boyne with a significance that went beyond its physical presence, turning it into a symbol of transformation, rebellion, and renewal. For the Celts, water was a conduit to the otherworld, its reflective surface a reminder of the unseen forces flowing beneath the visible. Mountains, with their imposing heights and mist-shrouded peaks, were seen as the abodes of gods and giants, their summits unreachable yet ever-present. The Celtic deities often bore associations with specific landscapes, their power rooted in the places they inhabited. Lug, a god of skill and craft, was tied to high places, his name echoing in the peaks and ridges of the land. To climb a mountain was not merely an act of physical exertion but a spiritual journey, a quest to draw closer to the divine forces that shaped the world. Forests, too, were sacred spaces, their dense canopies sheltering both mortal and mystical beings. The woods were the domain of the Púca, whose shape-shifting antics could either aid or hinder travelers. Every rustle of leaves and flicker of shadow hinted at the presence of something unseen, a reminder of the delicate balance between the natural and supernatural. For the Celts, entering a forest was an act of faith and courage, a step into a living myth where anything was possible. Even the smallest features of the landscape, an oddly shaped rock, a lone tree on a hill, a bubbling spring, held significance. These were places where stories took root, their origins lost in time, but their meanings carried forward by generations. To the Celts, these features were not mere curiosities, but anchors of identity and culture. They were touchstones for memory, connecting the present to an ancestral past that was never far away. This profound connection between myth and landscape shaped how the Celts saw themselves and their world. The land was not a passive backdrop, but an active participant in the stories they told. It was both stage and character, its every curve and shadow imbued with meaning. To walk through a Celtic landscape was to step into a living narrative, one where the past and present coexisted, and the boundaries between the mortal and the mythical dissolved. Even now, the landscapes of Celtic lands carry the weight of these stories. Visitors to these regions may not always know the tales, but they feel the atmosphere, the sense that the land is watching, listening, waiting. The myths may have shifted and changed, but the connection remains, a testament to the enduring power of a people who saw the world not just as it was, but as it could be. The landscape and its myths are inseparable, bound together in a dance as old as the hills themselves. In the vibrant tapestry of Celtic festivals, mythical creatures played a central role, their presence weaving the ordinary and the extraordinary into a seamless dance of belief and celebration. These festivals, marked by fire, song, and sacred rites, were not merely times of communal gathering, they were thresholds where the human world brushed against the otherworld. The creatures of myth were more than symbols, they were participants in these sacred cycles, their tales echoing the rhythms of the seasons. At Samhain, the end of the harvest and the beginning of the darker half of the year, the veil between worlds was said to be at its thinnest. This liminal time was ripe for the Púca, a mischievous shapeshifter, to emerge from the shadows. Farmers left offerings of the last harvested crops to appease the Púca, ensuring its goodwill for the coming year. To neglect this ritual was to invite chaos, spoiled crops, misfortune, or worse. The Púca embodied the uncertainty and capriciousness of nature as winter loomed, a reminder of the fragile balance between humanity and the wild forces beyond their control. Beltane, the festival of fire and fertility, heralded the arrival of summer and the vitality of life. It was a time when the city, the noble fairy folk, were said to walk among mortals. Offerings of milk and honey were left at sacred sites to honor the city and seek their blessings. Yet, The city were not entirely benevolent. To offend them, especially during this sacred time, could result in illness, misfortune, or even abduction into their ethereal realm. The festival's bonfires, leaping flames illuminating the night, were both celebrations of life and defenses against the unseen, their light a boundary to keep the otherworld's more dangerous spirits at bay. Lugnasad, the festival of the harvest, bore the weight of gratitude and reverence. Named for the god Lugh, this festival celebrated the fruits of labor and the abundance of the earth. It was also a time when tales of mythical creatures intertwined with the land's bounty. The Kelpie, with its ties to water and fertility, was whispered about in riverside gatherings. Farmers might tell cautionary tales of the Kelpie to children, reminding them of the dangers lurking in the natural world even as they celebrated its gifts. In these moments, the Kelpie served as a guardian of respect for the forces that made life possible. Imbolc, the festival of light and renewal, honored Bridget, goddess of poetry, healing, and fertility. It was a time of transition, as winter gave way to the first stirrings of spring. The banshee's mournful wail, a harbinger of death and change, was a chilling reminder of life's fragility. Yet, in Imbolc's context, her presence also carried a message of hope. Just as the land began to thaw and life returned, the banshee's cries could be seen as a release of grief, clearing the way for new beginnings. Even the wild hunt, led by Araun and his ghostly hounds, held significance in the cycles of Celtic festivals. While not tied to a specific celebration, the hunt was a force associated with the darker times of the year, particularly Samhain and the long winter nights. The chilling baying of Araun's hounds was said to signal a soul's passage to the otherworld, a stark reminder of mortality amidst the communal joy of the festivals. To hear the hounds was both a warning and a comfort, a recognition of the inevitable cycles of life and death. Through these festivals, mythical creatures became more than figures of stories. They were woven into the fabric of daily life, their presence shaping the rituals, fears, and joys of the Celtic people. The festivals were not only celebrations, but acts of alignment with the forces that governed both the seen and unseen worlds. They acknowledged the creatures' power, sought their favor, and respected their roles as guardians of the natural and supernatural realms. The echoes of these festivals persist even today, their roots visible in modern celebrations like Halloween, which draws heavily from Samhain's themes, or May Day, reminiscent of Beltain's fiery exuberance. The mythical creatures, too, remain, their tales retold in new forms, but still carrying the weight of ancient reverence. They are reminders of a time when the world was alive with magic, and every festival was a meeting place of myth and reality. There is something timeless about the allure of Celtic mythological creatures. They are not just relics of a bygone age, but enduring symbols that have captivated hearts and minds for centuries. Their stories hold a unique kind of magic, blending beauty with terror, wisdom with mischief, and hope with mystery. These beings have never truly faded into the past. They linger, woven into the fabric of imagination, their presence felt in whispers of the wind, shadows of the forest, and glimmers on the surface of a still lake. The enduring appeal of these creatures lies in their duality. They embody the contradictions of life itself, the light and dark, the known and unknown, the safe and the wild. Take the Púca, for instance, a creature of boundless mischief but also unexpected wisdom. Its shape-shifting nature reflects the unpredictable turns of fate, reminding us that even in chaos, there is something to be learned. The Kelpie, simultaneously a symbol of fertility and a deadly force, speaks to the delicate balance between creation and destruction. These creatures defy simple definitions, challenging us to embrace complexity and uncertainty. At the heart of their appeal is their connection to the land. Celtic mythological creatures are not abstract ideas, but spirits tied to rivers, mountains, forests, and seas. This deep relationship with nature resonates even in the modern world, where the need to reconnect with the earth grows ever more urgent. The banshee's wail, echoing through the hills, is as much a cry for the living to respect the cycles of life and death as it is a lament for the departed. The city, guardians of sacred groves and hidden realms, remind us of the sanctity of the natural world and our responsibility to protect it. These creatures also serve as mirrors, reflecting the fears, hopes, and values of those who tell their stories. In times of uncertainty, the tales of the Dullahan, its headless figure riding into the night as a harbinger of doom, speak to the inescapable nature of fate and the courage needed to face it. The Morrigan, with her connection to war and ravens, embodies the complexity of power, strategy, and transformation, themes that remain as relevant today as they were millennia ago. Through these beings, the Celts explored profound questions about life, death, and the unseen forces that shape existence. Even in their most fearsome forms, these creatures inspire awe. The fur-bald, ancient giants of myth stand as testaments to resilience and the strength to endure. Their stories remind us of the importance of standing firm, even when the odds seem insurmountable. The leprechaun, with his cunning and treasure-hoarding ways, offers lessons about greed, resourcefulness, and the humor that can be found in life's trickiest situations. Each creature carries a message, its tale a guide for navigating the complexities of the human experience. In modern times, Celtic mythological creatures have found new life in literature, film, art, and music. They are no longer confined to oral traditions or ancient manuscripts. They have leapt into fantasy novels, blockbuster movies, and even video games. Yet, despite these new interpretations, their core essence remains unchanged. The Púca may transform into a creature of digital pixels, or the Kelpie may emerge in a graphic novel, but their connection to mystery, nature, and the human spirit persists. Their adaptability speaks to their timelessness, their ability to evolve while staying rooted in ancient truths. What makes these creatures truly enduring, however, is their ability to ignite the imagination. They invite us to see the world as the Celts did, alive with magic and possibility. They challenge us to look beyond the surface, to find wonder in the ordinary and meaning in the mysterious. They remind us that the stories we tell are not just entertainment, but reflections of who we are, where we've been, and where we might go. Celtic mythological creatures endure because they speak to something universal, something that transcends time and culture. They remind us that life is full of wonder and challenge, beauty and danger, and that the greatest stories are the ones that embrace it all. Their tales are not just echoes of the past, but whispers of the eternal, inviting each generation to listen, learn, and keep the magic alive. Celtic mythological creatures have a way of sinking their claws into the human heart, their stories lingering like the echo of a haunting melody. They evoke emotions both primal and profound, an unshakable mixture of wonder and dread. These beings are not mere relics of ancient folklore. They are timeless expressions of humanity's deepest fears, hopes, and fascinations. Their tales captivate us not only because of the creatures themselves, but because of the truths they reveal about the human spirit and its unyielding connection to the world around it. Perhaps their most captivating quality is their paradoxical nature. Celtic creatures rarely fit into neat categories of good or evil. They are wild and unpredictable, embodying the duality of existence. The Púca can bring blessings of good fortune or wreak havoc depending on its whims. The city, ethereal and noble, are both benefactors and dangerous beings who demand respect. This duality resonates because it mirrors the complexity of life itself, beautiful and terrifying, generous and cruel. Their ambiguity forces us to grapple with uncertainty, a reality we cannot escape. What keeps these creatures alive in our imaginations is their connection to the natural world. Unlike myths that are purely fantastical, Celtic creatures are rooted in landscapes, dark forests, glimmering lakes, rolling hills, and stormy seas. The Kelpie embodies the untamable power of water, while the Banshee's wail seems to rise from the winds sweeping through desolate valleys. They make the natural world feel alive, imbued with spirit and intention. In a modern age where people often feel detached from nature, these creatures remind us of the Earth's power, beauty, and mystery. Beyond their ties to nature, these beings serve as powerful symbols of transformation. The Morrigan, shifting between a raven and a goddess, represents cycles of war, death, and rebirth. Selkies, who shed their seal skins to walk as humans, speak to themes of identity, longing, and the pull between two worlds. These creatures are not static figures, but beings in flux, reflecting the inevitability of change and the resilience required to face it. They invite us to confront transformation in our own lives, to see it not as an end, but as a continuation of a greater story. The enduring appeal of these creatures is also deeply tied to their emotional impact. The cry of the banshee can send chills down the spine, not only because of its ghostly nature, but because it taps into universal experiences of grief and loss. The leprechaun's clever trickery brings laughter and a sense of cunning triumph, while the dark, headless figure of the Dullahan fills the heart with dread at the thought of fate's unyielding hand. These stories provoke feelings that are raw and universal, making them deeply relatable even across centuries. Celtic creatures have also endured because they adapt to the times while staying true to their essence. In ancient days, they were part of oral traditions, whispered around fires and told as cautionary tales. Today, they leap from the pages of novels, enchant us on film screens, and even find new life in the digital age of gaming and virtual worlds. The Kelpie might appear as a fearsome water beast in a fantasy game, or the city might influence a character in a best-selling series. No matter the medium, their core remains, a connection to mystery, power, and the interplay of human and otherworldly forces. Their stories endure because they resonate with something deeply human, the need to make sense of the unknown. The Celts used these creatures to explain natural phenomena, explore moral dilemmas, and navigate life's uncertainties. Today, they serve as metaphors for the complexities of modern life. The fearsome Dullahan reminds us of our mortality, the city of the unseen connections that influence our lives, and the Púca of the unpredictability of fate. Through their tales, we find echoes of our struggles, triumphs, and desires. But perhaps their greatest power lies in their ability to spark the imagination. They invite us to look beyond the mundane and see the magic hidden in the world. They remind us that rivers might hold secrets, that forests might conceal beings of great wisdom, and that the wind might carry voices from another time. In a world often dominated by rationality, these creatures reignite a sense of wonder and possibility, encouraging us to believe in the extraordinary. Celtic mythological creatures endure because they are timeless. They are not just characters in old stories, they are reflections of the human experience, guides through life's mysteries, and reminders of the boundless possibilities of imagination. Their tales will continue to be told, not because they belong to the past, but because they speak to the eternal. They are as alive now as they were when first whispered under starry skies, their presence as vivid as the landscapes they inhabit and the hearts they've touched. Mythology is humanity's most enduring mirror, reflecting the vast landscape of imagination, fear, and wonder that defines our existence. It is where dreams and nightmares intertwine, giving life to beings that embody the deepest recesses of the human psyche. Every tale, every creature, every god or spirit is born from the need to explain the unexplainable, to put shape to the shapeless forces that govern our lives. These myths are not mere stories, they are profound revelations of what it means to be human. In mythology, imagination finds its truest expression, unbound by the constraints of reality. The Celts, for example, gave life to creatures like the Púca, who could transform into any form it desired, challenging perceptions of identity and truth. These shapeshifters are not just fanciful, they speak to our fascination with transformation, our longing to break free from the confines of a singular self. They remind us that imagination is limitless, a place where we can transcend the boundaries of the physical world. Myths also capture our primal fears, turning them into tangible beings we can confront and, perhaps, understand. The Dullahan, headless and unrelenting, is the embodiment of mortality. Its spectral ride reminds us of the inevitability of death, but also of the courage it takes to face it. By giving shape to death, the Celts made it something that could be narrated, visualized, and shared, a communal acknowledgement of a universal truth. This act of storytelling transforms fear into wisdom, an act of defiance against the unknown. Yet mythology is not solely about fear, it is also about beauty and wonder. The city, luminous and otherworldly, represent humanity's yearning for connection with the divine and the sublime. These beings, guardians of nature and keepers of ancient secrets, are reflections of the awe that arises when faced with the grandeur of the natural world. Their stories remind us of the sacredness of the earth and our place within its vast, interconnected web. Through them, the imagination finds solace, creating a bridge between the human and the infinite. Imagination is not only expressed in the creation of mythical creatures, but also in the worlds they inhabit. The Celts envisioned the otherworld as a place of vibrant beauty and peril, where time flowed differently and reality itself bent. These landscapes are as much characters as the beings who populate them, shaped by the human desire to understand what lies beyond. They are a testament to the boundless creativity of the human mind, capable of envisioning realms that transcend the physical. At its core, mythology serves as a mirror because it reflects our desires and dilemmas. The Morrigan, a goddess of war and prophecy, embodies the duality of destruction and renewal. She is not simply a figure of terror, but a symbol of transformation, of the cycles that define both nature and human existence. Her presence in myths forces us to confront the parts of ourselves that we fear or deny, challenging us to grow and adapt. Through mythology, the human imagination also explores morality, ethics, and the consequences of our actions. The Kelpie, luring unsuspecting victims into the water, is not just a creature of folklore but a warning about the dangers of greed and carelessness. These tales, while fantastical, are deeply rooted in human experiences, offering lessons that are as relevant today as they were centuries ago. Imagination, in this sense, becomes a tool for teaching, a way of preserving wisdom through generations. Myths endure because they tap into universal truths, but they also evolve, reshaped by each generation's unique perspective. Modern retellings of Celtic myths, for example, reflect contemporary concerns, environmental preservation, identity, and the search for meaning in a chaotic world. This adaptability underscores the power of imagination to remain relevant, a constant companion to humanity's ever-changing journey. Ultimately, mythology as a mirror reveals one essential truth: the human imagination is infinite. It is a force that shapes and is shaped by our experiences, fears, and dreams. Through myths, we confront the unknown, celebrate the extraordinary, and explore the depths of our being. These stories are not confined to the past, they are living testaments to our creative spirit, reflecting who we are and who we aspire to become. In their reflection, we see not just ancient truths, but endless possibilities.